please do after the meeting, if you're here to the end. Sheila, you just got really excited there. All right. Is there any public comment on anything that's not on the agenda tonight?
How many drugs have you taken tonight?
I stopped them last week.
Okay.
That's why you didn't see me here.
I want to make sure that
last Wednesday
that you're ready.
No, I'm ready. Just Advil. No public comment? Okay, we do have one item for new business. The Affordable Housing Trust Fund yesterday had a meeting and they were discussing on should they put in a citizen warrant article to ask for X amount of dollars for an Article 4 that would go to Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And you could do this with a citizen warrant article, or it could come from the select board. And the meeting was yesterday afternoon. Tucker, who's going to maybe talk about this, will give us a little bit of a review, but we didn't have time to put this in the packet. So there's no open meeting law violations. This is, it's new business because we didn't have the time to get it ready. Actually, there's a technical term for that, Libby.
Well, Mr. Chairman, if I could just read a little bit out of the open meeting law. May a public body consider a topic at a meeting that was not listed in the meeting notice? Just summary, yes. If it is a topic that the chair did not reasonably anticipate 48 hours before the meeting, so you should make that determination. If a meeting topic is proposed after the meeting notice is posted, the public body is encouraged to update its posting to provide the public with as much notice as possible of what subjects will be discussed during the meeting. There was no time for that. Although a public body may consider a topic that was not listed in the meeting notice, if unanticipated, the Attorney General strongly encourages public bodies to postpone discussion and action on topics that are controversial or may be of particular interest to the public if those topics were not listed in the meeting notice. So I
received notice this yesterday afternoon, and we didn't get the information. I didn't until this morning, so everything you just said, it seems to fall into place for that. And we can always decide at a future date to ratify the vote, but we're looking for, is there any interest in this?
Yeah, and I can put a little context. Tucker's here, and Brian Sullivan and Linda Williams, so a couple members of the Affordable Housing Trust, and Brooke as well. So we had a meeting yesterday, and we've been going through what I would consider a very rigorous meeting schedule with our strategic plan, and really trying to align the finish of that, the output, the review up with being able to be ready for town meeting. And it hasn't quite lined up the way that we hoped it would. But yesterday we had a meeting where, based on the process that we've been going through the past 10 months, we were able to put a number together that really, I think in many respects is defensible. It makes a lot of sense. It gives the Affordable Housing Trust an opportunity to be able to respond to the select board goals, an opportunity to assist and collaborate with other housing organizations that didn't get as much funding as they usually do. And the hope is that we become a bit of a point person or point board for some of these affordable housing opportunities. And a number that allows us, it's identified our operating budgets, it allows us to add additional programs. And so that number came out of the meeting yesterday, and there was discussion about the best way to move forward based on last year and this lack of trust between boards and lack of communication, which we realized, again, through the last 9 months, really, the onus is on us to develop these relationships with other boards. We're at the very beginning of stages of that. There's some trustees that would like to put in a citizens warrant article because they feel it gives, regardless of what this board or FinCom decides, it gives the public the opportunity to support affordable housing at a meaningful level where it's an amount that will have an impact. Other trustees felt that we want to start working with the other boards now and go forward collaboratively, be on the same page together and in support of each other. So we didn't have an opportunity before the deadline for the citizens warrant article to be able to have this be a part of the select board discussion. So that's why it's here today. Tucker put together a spreadsheet that shows how the money would be allocated if we were to ask. And the number that we would be asking for is $3 million. And you can see that is that includes operating costs. One of the things that we identified as a major issue is our communications and our outreach. So we anticipate spending money getting out to the public, getting the details. And I think if you have specific questions about some of the other ones, Tucker can definitely fill those in. But the big thing we want to be able to do, and this is something that again, we'll be continuing to flesh out using our strategic plan as a guide, is the land acquisition. We identified about five properties that have come in front of us over the past year that fell into approximately, I think, $2.9 million to $3.5 million that would have allowed us to, if we had been able to act on them, we would have been able to significantly impact the safe harbor, potentially even get us to safe harbor in one go. So these were ones that came to our board that we are not able to act on. And if we can't act on these, then we're only ever going to be tipping away. So that's the biggest change. Jim was there, very thankful that he was able to attend the meeting yesterday. So that's really the context of it. And I know it's significantly different from the ask last year, but I really feel we are significantly in a significantly different place. And I feel there's real leadership on the board, that we've got a lot of people are passionate about affordable housing, but we've got leadership that are committed to financial accountability and transparency. So we're in a very different position.
Thank you, Rita. Jim?
I just had some, can you hear me? Just some overall comments. Attended the meeting yesterday. I had the pleasure of serving as this board's representative to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund my first year. And had a lot of concerns with our lack of really a strategic plan, really, lack of really having the resources to do the things we wanted to do, lack of really a consensus about what our role was. And I can't tell you what a different world the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is today than it was, 3 years ago. The quality, the quality of the board members, the comprehensiveness of their analysis, their knowledge base, just the significant, it's, light years. It's come light years. And I know, and I kind of reflect on, so I was chairman of the finance committee in 2016, when at town meeting, we were at that time, we were going for the housing, what we now call the housing bank, getting a law passed or through the State House home rule petition, and it was really at that time we said we really need to put some dollars into it to have some skin in the game, and that's why we, as the FinCom, recommended $1 million, which really jump-started the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And I really think we're at that same juncture now. I was one that felt that, well, you need to have a plan. You really need to tell us what you're going to do. But in the absence of having capital, there isn't an opportunity to make an investment. And they've made a clear demonstration that it's a $3 million. And people are walking around with $3 million in their pocket and making acquisitions to build small developments, and we need to have that same capacity. So, so I'm very much in favor of it. And as I said, I think they've come a long way, and I certainly endorse that and welcome to have. But I just wanted to kind of report really as more of a observer yesterday to make those, so this board knew my observations about the tenor and of that board.
Thank you, Jim.
I guess I have a question. What's future program development, $250,000?
So we have shortlisted approximately 7 programs at the moment, ones that we have that have been thrown out over the past year and a half that I've been on the board, and they include, there's a variety of programs, and the idea is that right now, really, we have the closing cost assistance program, and we've talked about down payment assistance. We've talked about subsidizing units, public-private partnerships, covenant buy-downs. These are the different kinds of programs that we're now going to essentially put through I would call it what might end up being a decision matrix, using our strategic plan as the guide to decide which of those programs are the ones that we develop now and which are the ones that we develop in the future.
Are there any programs that are not based on income out? Are all your programs, have you considered any other incentives for housing other than giving money away, basically?
One of the things that I think is probably right now that we're looking at the most is incentivizing year-round rentals. That's something that has been brought to our attention as a couple homeowners who have switched from seasonal rentals to year-round rentals have said that it's actually financially beneficial to them, and if more people knew that. So those sort of incentivizing rentals, year-round rentals, is the one that doesn't necessarily require inputs from us, but more guidance in identifying what those incentives might be. And there might be some essentially non-cash incentives that would help with that. I think there's more. There are definitely more that we can explore. And again, I think we really have a short list right now. But really the year-round rental is the one that is most relevant.
You know, I think their driver, Matt, is really to see, you know, what can we, whether we've designated them or not, they are the folks who are either going to make or not make our strategic plan, which is to come up with the 24 units or whatever it is in the first 2 years. So all of their focus is on getting units on the shy list within a very short time. And I know you've talked about, which are great, you know, maybe there's zoning changes we could do or other kinds of non-taxpayer funded things. But given the time frame that we as a board have established in our own strategic plan, the land acquisition seems to be the right path.
No, and I wouldn't argue with that.
Yeah.
But first off, we're being asked to agree. I can't support it, even though I support housing 100%. I can't support it without seeing a strategic plan. I can't support. You know, I'd like to see the details. I'd like to see what has shaken out and how it is going to be spent. And I agree. You know, I agree. There's been huge improvement, but at the same time, it's sort of I need to see the details. And so. Yeah, because you could take $3 million and use it really efficiently and get us to shy. You could, you know, or you could take $3 million and do taxpayer, you know, homeowner assistance for 80%, 100%, 150, and a bunch of other programs and create 4 shy units. So how we choose to spend the money will dictate the success or not. And I think, you know, that if it's going to be the blueprint and it's basically saying. If it's going to be the blueprint, then I think me personally, I have to see the blueprint, and we have to have a conversation about is the blueprint the right blueprint. And for example, if we took that, if you guys were coming to me right now and said, hey, here's a property that we can buy, and I actually know of one and spoke to somebody, and it needs a subsidy of $60,000, $70,000 a unit, that equals $3 million, and if we do it, we solve our shy. I'd be the first one to say, great, you know, here it's on paper, $3 million, we put it right to that, that's great. And I think that's different than what I think we're being asked.
No, absolutely not. You will absolutely have that opportunity because it's within the our delegation of the funds that any expenditure over $100,000 comes to this board for approval. So when those deals get put together, they will come before this board and I assume executive session, and we will have the rigor of asking those very questions.
And with the funding there already, it's not then going back to an annual town meeting to appropriate it. It's already been moved there, and then it does go through the process of vetting the project.
It allows us to act in a market that moves very quickly. And again, the money, the program, the way we decide to use the $3 million, acquire the land, whichever land it is, still comes back here. I think in regards to the strategic plan and seeing some of those details, that really is unfortunately just a little bit of a time crunch. That is going to be one of the next things that the Affordable Housing Trust has to present to this board is the outcome of our strategic plan. So again, this is unfortunately.
When is that due?
Well, we have another meeting Tuesday, and that's our sort of initial comments. We've had about a week. We'll have had 2 weeks at that point to go through it. So a meeting next Tuesday, a meeting in December, and the plan is to really have it finished by January that's our I think ambitious goal of having it finalized by beginning of January. So, again, there's been a huge commitment to try and fast track this as much as possible while still allowing us to move through it thoughtfully. I think that in regards to, again, it's really what Dawn and Jim said. It's a constant chasing our tail. It's either, if you want the money, show us what you're going to do, or, if we had the money accessible, we can show you what we can do. When we come forward with, if we know that we have the funds there, we can come forward with a project that is going to be a much better project. And most likely, we might be walking you through some of the options that we didn't take. Each piece of property, you know yourself that every piece of property is different. So for us to come up, to identify a property today, come up with a plan, focus only on that plan, and then come to that one only to lose it because we can't get the funding in time is a lot of effort for no gain. So I think we need to know what property we have and then come up with the best solution from there, which is then vetted by this board.
So you're trying to move faster, but keep the oversight.
Absolutely.
Oversight doesn't go away.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Tucker? Is that okay?
Yeah, I want to say something, but I can wait.
Do it now?
No, I can wait.
Okay. Go ahead, Tucker.
No, you
Go ahead.
go ahead.
Please, go ahead.
Thank you. Tucker Hahn, housing specialist. Thank you for the opportunity to have this discussion tonight. I want to, thank the Select Board representative on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, Rita Higgins, and I want to thank Select Board member Jim Kelly for attending the discussion yesterday. Just relative to, I think, the issue that we're just talking about, since the public doesn't have the benefit of the letter and materials that were provided because this wasn't anticipated in the packet, I just want to read like a short part of the letter that I think is pretty much right on point. In the attached budget discussion document, we outline where we believe we can support in a material way the Select Board's strategic goals around housing, particularly Goal 1 and Goal 3. We also outline where we are seeking supplemental funds to our request to the town, including from the Community Preservation Committee and Nantucket Cottage Hospital's Community Health Improvement Program. When the Affordable Housing Trust Fund went before the FinCom last year, the first question asked by the committee was, why did the Affordable Housing Trust Fund not buy the Malcolm property, which we all know is the Surfside Crossing site? While a member of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund had, in fact, attempted to do this with private financial support, the reality was the trust didn't have the capital. The transaction, according to the published sale price, would have required $4 million. The trust did not have even half that amount at the time. It is vital to be in position to capitalize on opportunities that can be important pieces in the housing puzzle when they come up. We think it worth underscoring that there is a thoughtful built-in check and balance system in the HTF structure where the Affordable Housing Trust Fund cannot expend any amount over $100,000 without Select Board approval. This requires the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to come to the Select Board with the business case for any project over $100,000 and ensure the Select Board agrees it is meritorious before proceeding.
Thank you, Tucker. Matt, I think it might get there for you. Maybe not 100% what you want, but close with the strategic plan, which will be in January. So I think, do we, as a board, do we like going forward sponsoring this versus a citizen warrant article? Like, that's the question, right? Because if not, then the citizen warrant article will come from a citizen. Or, I didn't say that right, but.
And it may, yes, it was essentially the crux of the discussion. And it may, we may not have a definitive answer here tonight. It may go forward anyways. And the idea is that we may come up with a number ourselves anyways for our own article. But there was trying to get a sense. I think the ideal scenario, again, is that the boards are working together and supporting each other. And so that was trying to understand where this board sits.
Well, I mean, the trust fund did not vote to submit a citizen article yesterday. So if anything was done, it'd be done by a member. Right. Mm-hmm. They took no formal action that this was even a good idea for them to do it. Lots of discussion, as Rita said, about we should work collaboratively together. And I made this statement that this is the kind of an article that needs the robust review of the Finance Committee. That's and I said I'd be happy to go and speak to the speak on behalf of this to the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee works on behalf of town meeting in the absence of articles being sponsored by the board or this board or the planning board. They don't have that kind of review. And the other thing is, I felt like, shame on us. I mean, this is, this is our goal. I mean, this is our goal. We own it, and we should be the folks sponsoring these. So that's and I had just one other comment, and it's not a reason to do it in and of itself, but I think there's some advantages to do it. As we went, one of the reasons to do that $1 million a few years ago is we felt it was a way to demonstrate to the legislative body that we were serious about this in our home rule petition. And as we go, I know Tucker's putting together a meeting with our representatives and senators. We even have a better case to tell them if we're saying we're committing $3 million. When we made our testimony a couple of years ago to the Joint Committee, there wasn't a lot of sympathy because of the perceived affluence of folks on Nantucket, and I think this would be a way that we've demonstrated our commitment to moving towards solving the affordable housing crisis.
Thank you, Jim. Don?
I just wanted to reiterate that I did raise this for discussion last week when we were talking about putting in citizens warrant articles, and reaffirm my commitment that I said I wanted to see a minimum of 1.7 million coming from us. And I would be fully supportive of this higher number as laid out by the trust fund. I would go so far as to make a motion that we do sponsor this and that we put it on our next regularly scheduled agenda to ratify that.
I would second that. Thank you.
Any discussion?
I think for discussion, we can take any action we need today. We don't have to wait until it's ratified at another meeting.
It was suggested.
It was? Okay. Well, it's not necessary, right, Libby?
Yeah.
Libby, it's not.
That's fine. I just,
And I think as well that, much of this discussion being in front of us tonight had to do with getting a sense of this board and if there, again, is there support. I think ratifying in a later meeting would be fine.
I'd be in favor of ratifying it once we saw a strategic plan and knew what the plan was. I just, and it's sort of, we've already jumped onto, we have to acquire property to be in the game. We're sitting on a huge property. What can we do here for $3 million? Has that been looked at? I don't know. So and maybe that has been talked with your board, and maybe it's front and center of the strategic plan. We sat here a year ago and we were asking for a plan. I support it. I won't vote against it tonight, but I'll abstain. But I just think that, there has to be a level of, accountability. And I think your board is much improved, and I'm, really happy that the work is happening. But I want to make sure that we're A, going far enough, and B, that that there's a clear direction. It just doesn't turn into something else. So I think, I live in a world where if I want money for my business, I have to show the plan first, show the income, explain how I'm going to spend it, justify it 5 different ways to get the money. I don't say, give me the money and trust how I'm going to spend it, and you're going to be really happy, Mr. Bank. I have to actually do the work up front. And so I just think that that's the world I come from. That's the world that I think most of the taxpayers live in, and I think we're putting the cart before the horse a little bit. So I just, and I support the goal. I support housing 100%. I support the money that we spend being used effectively to do that housing 100%. So.
Just to add, again, I think the things that you are concerned about, they are going to be addressed in the strategic plan, and it's not going to be immediate. This isn't an instant fix and all the things at once. Again, 7 is already too big of a short list. And some of the things you're talking about really speak to even further resources that we need. The idea of how we manage these town properties, who does that fall to, and where does the Affordable Housing Trust fall into that? Those are the things that are on the table now, and again, won't be answered next week definitively or next month, but they are on the radar. There has been a very complete and comprehensive look at all the opportunities and avenues we have. And the reason that we haven't done it yet is, again, comes back to the fact that we don't have great communication between the boards. And that's one of the top priorities for the Affordable Housing Trust, is to develop better communication and, again, be able to support each other. So,
I sat in a Affordable Housing Trust kind of brainstorming session a month ago, 3 weeks ago, and I was very, similar to you, Jim, I was very impressed with the conversations of how to go forward and what programs to come up with and where you were in the strategic plan. Because I remember a year ago, too, when I sat in the FinCom meeting when they just asked all these different questions and there's really no concrete answers. Mm-hmm. Well, I think you have most of the answers, and we'll have them in January moving forward. So I have 100% faith in the board and what you guys are doing, whether it's 3 million or 2.5 or 4. I think you're going to be successful with it. So
thank you.
Just have my support. Are we ready for a vote?
I'd be more comfortable with a motion that said we want to add we're talking about articles for the town meeting, and that we would like to add an article for Affordable Housing Trust Fund in the amount of $3 million. And rather than having it ratified, I think that, to Matt's point about the strategic plan, because, we're not, personal.
Well, my motion is to add the article, but my understanding is because it wasn't on the agenda, we do have to re-ratify it at a later meeting.
The Attorney General suggested.
Yeah, it's not.
Strongly encourages.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I'd rather go that route.
So I'd just like to motion for it to go on the next available agenda as well.
Which would be the 28th. Okay.
To ratify the same motion.
So you second it?
Yes, I second it. Yeah.
Okay. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed or abstaining?
Abstaining.
Okay. So the motion carries 4 votes for, 1 abstaining.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for all the hard work you're doing.
Thank you.
Okay, so that was new business. Moving right along. Approval of minutes, approval of payroll warrants, and approval of treasury warrants as...
Motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That motion carries unanimously. Consent items. Gift acceptance for the police department.
Did you include the...
Pending contracts.
Oh, sorry.
No, we didn't do
Living
pending contracts.
You're so fast, Don. It threw me off.
I just wanted to mention a
Thank
couple things here. The Pulpus Harbor dredging project is finally about to beginning within the next couple of weeks. We've got a bid, we've got a grant, and we're anticipating the project to start very soon. So I just wanted to point that out because it's been a long time in coming. There's we've been calling it the outbuilding. It's a not really any more used building out at the Loran Barracks property, and some nearby property owners are funding its demolition through private donations. So that's a consent item for you to accept those for that purpose. Just pointing it out.
Any thoughts, questions?
I move approval.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Now on to consent items. Gift acceptance for police department.
I make a motion that I like the way this is outlined here, so I make a motion that we approve the consent agenda for gifts acceptances as noted.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That motion carries. Citizen department request. We have a request for approval of change of manager for annual all alcohol beverage package store license for Murray's Beverage Store.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That motion carries. Number 2, Nantucket Land Council request for preliminary review conservation restrictions to be held by Nantucket Land Council, Inc. for portion of 16 Madawi Creek Road. Any comments? Madawi.
My understanding, just to confirm that this is procedural, this is part of
to allow it to go to
first
town
step.
council.
Yeah.
And then it'll come back to us again.
I'd make a motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Now, was that motion for Madui or Madawi?
Mine was from Madui. But if you have a Midwestern way of pronouncing it, we'll take that too.
Well, thank you, Matt. Thank you.
One question looking at that is, I would want to make sure we're looking at, do we have the access that we need on that, totally on that property? You know, it is a waterfront property. Are there any trails or anything else? Is this our chance to ask for that if we're going to be doing this? So,
Mr. Chairman, Selectman Fee, I'm Kevin Dale. I'm the successor trustee of the trust that owns the property, also the attorney for the trust. There is access to the property from Madui Creek Road.
perfect. Thank you.
All right, so it's Madui. All right, Vineyard Wind update. I'll give them that.
Hey, Tobias Glidden here from Vineyard Power. And Nate didn't have a chance to update the board last week, so I wanted to bring him in this week. He's made a commitment to be down here as much as possible from Vineyard Wind, and I just wanted to give him a chance to kind of introduce himself to the public and just give a brief update of what's been going on with the project over the last 6 months.
Great, thanks a lot. You folks move quite efficiently, and I'll try and follow suit. So my name is Nate Mayo. I'm manager of development and policy for Vineyard Wind. I've been on the island several times over the last few months, this is my first time appearing here. I know Vineyard Wind representatives have been before the board a few times. Had some interesting and helpful conversations, Ms. Higgins and your energy coordinator, as well as some other community members. So just briefly a bit about my background. I worked actually at the State House for several years for the former state senator, Rob O'Leary, and so worked on some Nantucket issues. We were fortunate enough to come out here occasionally. I would also say that I wouldn't call it my fondest memory, but as bleary-eyed soccer players, we'd come out here and play Nantucket in high school. I'm from Provincetown, and we'd often, the two teams would trade wins depending on who had the least sleep. It's about a 6-7 hour tour to get here back when the slow boat was going. So it's good to be here under different circumstances. But I do want to say that sort of at the outset, I'll go through the slides and give you folks a brief update, and the public as well. We're here and we're interested in continuing the conversation that's gone on for several years about offshore wind about 15 miles south of where we are. So just to get started here, a bit of background about the company's ownership. Avangrid Renewables and Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners are the two main parent companies. Extensive expertise in constructing and operating renewable energy facilities, as well as offshore wind. Avangrid Renewables is one of the major renewable energy companies in the world. Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners is a investment company that is dedicated to largely investing public employee pension funds in renewable energy projects. Very much a build and hold company, more so than a buy and hold. A lot of experience there and in the financing acumen as well to create a stable project. I should stress a good history of corporate social responsibility and commitment to environmental, social, and corporate governance. Our community partner, who you may have heard, and Tobias stands as the Nantucket representative. Vineyard Power is a community group from the island who very much predates Vineyard Wind and the offshore wind discussion we're in today. Started to create community-owned offshore wind facilities in the wake of the Cape Wind saga, as we should call it. Changing their focus, decided to partner with an offshore wind developer to pursue a community-oriented project, and found a partner in Vineyard Wind, and has really done a lot of the groundwork to inform the project, but also before that to inform offshore wind as the federal government and state governments have begun to pursue it. So they are a prominent entity. As we've moved forward in the process here, though, a direct relationship with Vineyard Wind proper. We've kind of begun to grow that relationship over the last year to 2 years, and more so in the last several months. So I just wanted to step back, and I will try to go through this somewhat quickly. You've got it in your packets, but the area where Vineyard Wind has proposed its offshore wind facility is the product of several years of intergovernmental work to really learn the lessons of Cape Wind, to step back and have a multi-level, multi-stakeholder process to determine from a fisheries, navigation, environmental, community perspective where the best place to site these things is. So that process went along for several years, paring down the area that you see in the middle to the smaller areas that have now been sectioned out for lease areas in the lower right. So that process brought us to the auction and issuance of leases. Vineyard Wind was the beneficiary of one of those leases, which is what now appears to be the, how shall I call that, the off-white in the slide there. And in following after that in 2015, the Massachusetts legislature, in following with the Global Warming Solutions Act, which mandated carbon reductions at the state level, passed the Energy Diversity Act, which mandated, among other things, an increase in offshore wind to be brought into the grid. There was a solicitation, a competitive process among the companies to bring Vineyard Wind, to bring offshore wind into our grid. And Vineyard Wind was the sole winner of a 800 megawatt bid to supply roughly 5.5% to 6% of the state's electrical load with the project. Ooh, did I press the wrong button? Thank you. So you may all have some familiarity with this. I'll go through it quickly. An 800 megawatt wind farm to power roughly 400,000 homes, about 1.6 million tons of CO2 per year to be extracted out of our energy grid, in addition to substantial reductions in NOx and other pollutants. At its nearest point, lying about 14.5 to 15 miles south to southwest of Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, and staging construction operations. It's a pretty substantial construction effort. Will be operated out of New Bedford, and an operations and maintenance facility will be located on Martha's Vineyard. We're going to connect into the Mid-Cape, which has a range of advantages for our grid, largely in terms of reliability. The power is essentially to be purchased by the state's utilities to be spread statewide. The electrons ultimately stay in southeastern Massachusetts, but the electricity goes to ratepayers in the Commonwealth. The construction schedule, we're well underway in permitting, and I've got a later slide that I will unfortunately walk you through briefly. That's quite complicated, but we expect to start construction in the fourth quarter of 2019 and begin our commercial operation at the end of 2021. What you see in this picture is one of the electrical service platforms, which is about midway into the offshore wind facility. There'll be two of them in the facility. The wind generators, the project has learned from the European experience. They've got nearly 100 offshore wind facilities in Northern Europe, about over 4,000 turbines spinning. It's become a proven technology. In their siting, typically they've embraced an envelope concept. It's a fast-moving technology, so the best bet for ratepayers, for governments, and for all parties involved is to permit a range of options so that the best and most efficient construction occurs. So one reason I would bring this up is we've talked in part of our permitting with Nantucket representatives as part of our historic Section 106 federal consultation to determine historic impacts. The turbine design is a major part of that. Staying under a certain level will limit the amount of lighting and other protective efforts that will minimize visual impact at night. We're also committing to using ADLS, after baseball season, ADLS. It's automatic aircraft detection system, which will drastically reduce any kind of nighttime visibility of lights offshore. Reduces it to about 1/1000th of the nighttime hours. So a substantial mitigative reduction of impacts in that sense. Let's see here. So a brief rundown of project benefits. Clearly, I don't need to go too deeply into the environmental benefits. We all understand climate change is a challenge for the region, challenge for communities like my own and for Nantucket, more so than most others. This really sets both the region and the country in a really important direction with pursuing clean energy. It's the biggest step we can take. Adding to that, as part of our bid, we know we're working in an area that's got other parties. There's marine mammal exposure there. The North Atlantic right whale, which is near and dear to my heart, is in crisis mode at the moment, and there's a need to do these projects properly so that we don't increase impact, and so that both the whales and humans and everyone else can benefit from the climate change impacts being reduced. So a $3 million fund was established as part of our bid to fund innovation to marine mammal protection. It's kind of a wide-ranging and broad conversation we're having with experts in the field as to what's the best way to purpose that funding to protect marine mammals, both as it relates to offshore wind and in a more general sense. So it's something we're really kind of excited to get moving as we approach financial close and construction and then operation. The mobilization of that fund will be an important part of the project. As far as general municipal economic and consumer benefits, there are a bunch of workforce development initiatives associated with the project. There's certainly a synergy with maritime industries in the region. From a consumer perspective, the DOER established or asserted that the project will result in $1.4 billion in ratepayer savings over business as usual. So there are some standard ratepayer benefits involved. Important in Nantucket, the project has established a resiliency and affordability fund, $1 million a year in each of 15 years, to support projects, including microgrids and addressing localized energy challenges, as well as other efficiency projects and rate relief. So Nantucket has been, the resiliency element was put in there with Nantucket squarely in mind. And we are, as we work forward through all the permitting and the complications of the project, we are looking at digging deep in with local communities as to what the priorities are and how to support that. I've had conversations with Lauren Sinatra at length, also Ms. Higgins, about the best way forward and the best information we can get from the community as to where those funds should go. And so just a bit about our outreach. I've been involved in the outreach effort directly on Nantucket for the last several months. That relationship extends back years. We have been most recently trying to catch, as I know it on Provincetown, sort of both the summer crowd and the winter crowd. The summer crowd's tourists and locals who are working their heads off, and as we get into the shoulder season, into the winter, it becomes more local. So we're trying to catch both of those and have a clear presence and keep listening. Been a lot of local discussion in the last several months, as well as a real effort to get the simulations and get project awareness out there. So starting in, what was it now, July? Starting in July and extending through, we're committed to extend all the way through into the middle of next year. We've got a visualization simulation downtown at the Shanty, which is hosted by Tobias, and we're actually, I think, very shortly going to be delivering another big visual simulation panorama to the energy coordinator, which may be hosted in her office, although it's quite large. I'm not sure if she's going to have the space for it. But anyways, it'll be word of the town. Just a brief thing that's in your packets there. Some of the highlights of our municipal outreach, as well as outreach to members of the general public, civic groups, and the like, local NGOs as well, and then a wider set of consultations, which some more applicable to the Nantucket community than others, but some of the leading state and federal environmental organizations. A range of topics, as you can imagine. Our discussions with fisheries interests are deeply involved and ongoing. We're doing a listening tour about pre and post research studies associated with fisheries, taking input from fishermen as to what we should be preparing ourselves for. So we're first out the gate in what is going to be a pretty substantial industry we expect for this region. And it's important that we get it right. It means ongoing communications with those experts, and it means ongoing communications with yourselves. I would want to close by just saying that I am available always. I hope to continue the conversation with you folks individually and with anyone who you think it's appropriate for us to reach out to. We have to tap into some of that local knowledge. I didn't make this slide, unfortunately. A range of governments did, but this is the permitting matrix that we're in currently. The green means we've begun these efforts, and the blue means they've been completed. We obviously hope to have all the blues filled in by the end of next year. What's important, there are many important elements to this slide, but I won't dig too much in other than to say there are state and federal environmental impact reports that are being processed and that are coming out regularly. I can give you folks more detail on when those dates are, but those are the areas for really the best areas for input and conversation. In addition to that, we've got our historic consultation, which is ongoing, that we're doing with BOEM, which is the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, and local officials. So that conversation really just started formally last week, and it'll continue for the coming months. We look forward to that. There is the potential for some mitigative efforts off-site that we're going to continue the conversation on. I think that's it. My contact info is there. You're welcome to email or call. My info is also on our website at vineyardwind.com.
Thank you, Nate. Any questions?
Yeah, Nate, I just wanted, from the consultation last week, it sounded like the paint color, the design changes, or design recommendations were recommendations from BOEM with the paint and the lights. But are those two things that Vineyard Wind is prepared to make?
Yes. So two of the main mitigation elements were choosing a color that reduces visual impact as best possible. It's a range of colors that the FAA authorizes, so we would go to the most favorable end, sort of the more towards the gray end. And with ADLS, that's part of our construction and operations plan. We call it the COP because we say that a lot. The construction operations plan, ADLS is a major part of that. We had a really good conversation actually, and came away with a couple of really good insights about how how we might be able to more detail some of our service operations, also sort of looking into the future. We've done a pretty detailed analysis of historic airline traffic, and just to not get too far into the weeds, but single-engine Cessnas would fly at a lower altitude, and those which would fly within this boundary, which is I think about within 1,100 feet of the turbine area and within a certain buffer zone, would trigger a lighting system. So the estimation from current air traffic, I think the last 10 years of air traffic indicates it's like roughly 2-minute intervals at a time, amounting to about 200 triggers, which would total about 3 hours and 49 minutes of lighting, based on current air traffic patterns. Of course, those do change, and so there was also a discussion about how do we deal with the eventualities that maybe it's more active or maybe less active than we anticipated. So yeah, we are committed to ADLS. That's a major part of our operation. It's obviously subject to approval by FAA and Coast Guard.
And I know you might not be able to comment, but this board sent a letter through Lorne many months ago now, suggesting or requesting for Vineyard Wind and BOEM to look at some other possible design changes that would minimize the visual impact, moving turbines, phasing the project, and some of those have been unfeasible. But we discussed those again, which are still, I believe, on the table, as well as the possibility of a community benefit agreement, perhaps similar to something you have with the vineyard. So I'm not sure if those are other ones that you can comment at all briefly. But
yeah, I mean, we're having that discussion. I think there are also some shorter term, shorter term ways to work together in a meaningful and material way that we want to continue that conversation. It's good to have a group to tap into and also to cast the net wide in terms of ideas there. The resiliency fund is Nantucket is an eligible community, and we really hope that in the early going a project is funded there. There will be other elements that we want to discuss and things we hope to be bringing to the board that can help. There's a lot of mutual benefit here with respect to the energy challenges that are faced by Nantucket and being somewhat in the neighborhood of sort of the next frontier of energy development in the region.
Thank you.
Any other comments, thoughts?
That's just a quick comment. I think we've come a long way from 10 years ago or so. I was on the FinCom 10 or 15 years ago, and everyone was fighting against Cape Wind, like very, very stridently. And one of my suggestions then, I think Toby and I were probably the only people saying we should be working with them to get benefit, not fighting it every step of the way. And I'm glad to see that that's kind of the direction that's taken, because this is an important issue for sure.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I depending on what company I'm in, I admit regularly that I was part of the Cape Wind opposition, working for Rob O'Leary, and that can get me accolades or it can get me sideways looks depending on where it is. But we're in a different place now, and I appreciate that.
You'll probably be 50-50 here still, so
okay.
Be careful. But.
All right. We strike that from the record, maybe.
All right. Thank you, Nate.
Great, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to public hearings. I'd like to open a public hearing and consider utility petition from National Grid, install 2 hand holes and encase conduit for 45 Sankaty Road.
Yes, Jim Huxley, engineer at National Grid. Yes, we're looking to have the customer install those handholds and conduits so we can supply electric service to number 45.
Any comments, questions, motion?
Close the public hearing.
I'm sorry? Oh, thank you. I take a week off, you get rusty. Anybody from the public like to speak about this? Okay, we'll close the public hearing.
Yeah, my only there's none of this is on a sidewalk or anywhere else. This is all buried, correct?
That's right.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't think so.
I'd make a motion to approve with the comments noted.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 The motion carries. And why no comment from planning, and then there was a comment on the next one? Is that just a timing issue, or they didn't comment because they didn't comment? Okay.
All right. I'd like to open a public hearing and consider utility petition from National Grid for 1 Jefferson Lane.
Mr. Chairman, I'm in a butter, so I don't know if I have to, but I'll sit this one out, sit back.
Okay.
Yeah, same thing here. We're looking to get service to number 1 Jefferson Lane, and the customer is going to be installing 120 feet of conduit.
Is there anyone here for the public like to speak on this? Seeing none, close the public hearing.
Motion to approve consistent with the recommendations from staff.
And I'd second, just for a quick discussion or a question, just to make sure the comment from fire department, I think that's the first time, that was pretty specific. And I just wanted to make sure that you were going to be able to do that.
Would you like to hear from Chief Murphy, Rita?
Yeah, sorry.
Would you?
From fire. Pardon?
Would you like to hear from Chief Murphy?
Well, I think
I will note that usually street blockings like this come through our office, especially if it's a private contractor that's doing the work. And we normally make sure that they close up the road at the end of each day so that access can go through.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I'm good as long as it's doable and noted.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. 4 and 1 abstain. Okay. Thank you, Jim. Okay. I'd like to open a public hearing to determine tax allocation for classification percentage of residential exemption to be granted for FY 2019.
FY19. Good evening. The purpose of the hearing tonight is twofold. One is to adopt a residential exemption, which can be anywhere from 1 to 35% of the average residential value. And secondly, to shift the burden, if any, to the commercial, industrial, and personal property classes. Last year we had a couple of meetings and we did increase the exemption to 25% and we reduced the shift from 175 to 1.7. So I prepared this memo quickly because we're trying to get the tax rate done early this year. So these numbers on the memo are based on last year's information. The residential exemption of 25%, which would yield an exemption of $518,251 to each qualifying property. The shift at 170 would give you a residential rate of 336, open space of 320, and a commercial, industrial, and personal property rate of 571. And then at the bottom, I've just given you some increases, the comparison from last year. We did do a full reval for fiscal year 19. Overall residential values went up about 6%. So the exemption went up. The average residential value went up. The average year-round value went up about 7%. Average tax bill, and I just want to point out something because Mr. Fee and I had a discussion as usual earlier. The residential exemption is based on a percentage of all residential properties. So that 25%, 508, the $2,073,002, that number is generated by adding up all of the residential vacant land, residential condos, all of the low-value properties. So it's a high number, but that's the way that the Department of Revenue has us do it. Now, just in case at the last minute, if you wanted to shift a different way, I did prepare a second handout. And I'm just going to apologize right now for my choice of color, which seemed good when I was working on my monitor, but the yellow is what I've proposed to you now. And then if you wanted to shift the first column that's blocked off, I've done it 20% exemption, and then in the middle is 4 different scenarios for a 25% exemption. The next one to the right is 30%, and then the one to the far right in the, I guess that's a mustard color, that would be a 35% exemption. And then within each of these columns, I've done variations of what the shift would look like. So starting with the blue column, if you voted a 1.25 shift, the tax bills would correspond below. And into the next column that's green, it would be a 25% exemption. Again, it would be a shift of 125 all the way up to 1.75. And then so on.
On the revaluation, what areas increased? You know, which ones went up substantially? Because if everything can go up 6% or 7%, but some areas can go up a lot more than that based on their value, what happens in the neighborhood. And the reason I'm asking is my family has a property down on the wharf that we rent out, and it's triple net to the tenants, and they went from, they're going to go up about, it's like 25% or so. They went from like 3.2 to 4 million. So they're going to go up a fair amount.
They are.
This 1 year, and it's a downtown commercial property. So I'm asking, is that an area that our waterfront downtown go up, or did all of downtown go up?
Commercial properties overall, island-wide, did go up about 5%. Where we saw the largest increase, believe it or not, was in two-family homes. We saw an increase there. I mean, we saw the normal increase of the high-end properties. They went up as well, but we did make adjustments in the low end.
Were there certain neighborhoods in particular that went up more than others? That just jumped out when you were looking at the spreadsheets?
Waterfront actually didn't go up as much as others.
Right.
I don't know if that's something Dawn's seeing or not in her business, but the average stuff, I mean, we follow the market, so you see what's going on in the market right now. We had a couple of duplex sales in what we considered the lower end market that really were over $1 million.
Those went up quite a bit.
Yeah, I heard someone made an offer on 4 duplexes that was unbelievable. I'm like, I won't share the number, but I couldn't believe that they were offered that much money for 4 duplexes.
So I'm happy to answer any questions or explain. Again, I apologize for my poor use of color.
I always have trouble looking at the column and then not remembering what's on the left. So what's the scenario where in all the scenarios that you've got,
I've given you
the residential goes up? Is the 103 a positive and then the 463 is a deduct?
Which column are you in?
The yellow one.
The yellow?
The tax rate went down.
The tax rate did go down.
But on the 103 and the 463?
Yep, the 103.
So the impact is?
It's a $103 increase.
Increase.
Yes.
And then for the commercial, they got a 463 decrease.
Right. That rate has actually gone down because the values went up. So the rate came down.
So, I've done that. I've said this before, and haven't been successful in arguing. But I'm just concerned about the residential property taxes, and I would like to see us have as little impact as we can to the residential, with the residential exemptions, and even if it's only $77, I'd rather see that be a wash than give it, and then rather than having that deduct go to commercial. And I don't know how to achieve that, but so I guess it's the 30% and the 1.2, like the 1.75 would, there's no like zero impact to the residential, right?
They would be 170. We could go in between.
Okay, I try to apply a theory to this stuff rather than a number. So
Sure.
My theory is, with all the things we've been asking taxpayers to pay in terms of new projects, new capital, I would like to see the opportunity that we can increase the residential exemption because we have that ability to go to 35% or something. What is by law? What are we able to go
You
up
could go to 35%. That would be the column to the far right.
No, I'm not saying. So we have some room.
You have lots of room. That's exactly why.
And we have an opportunity as we're facing some pretty huge debt exclusion overrides and cost to the taxpayers to try to make them keep them on an even keel. And that's from a philosophy. That's what I would like to see us do.
And I agree with you. And I think right now it hasn't gone up much on anybody this year, depending what comes through for overrides. Right now, I look at it and say it's fairly flat. And if we give my concern last year, and it continues to be this year, if we go all the way to 35, then we have no ability later on to mitigate some of these issues. And I think people should be voting and all paying a little bit more, So I'm happy keeping it where it is this year, and then and then seeing where so one question, Brian, what do we have on the docket for spring overrides, and is that factored into this?
So any overrides factored in at the annual town meeting in the spring would not be calculated into this rate. They would be calculated into future rates. Just one thing to keep in mind is that we just authorized a permanent borrowing for about $13 million for the fire station, which the first payment will be due in fiscal 20. About 3 months ago or so, give or take, you signed and authorized the financing with the Clean Water Trust for $14 million of the Nantucket Harbor Shimmo project, and that first payment is actually due in fiscal 20. So the assessor and I have talked about this, which is why I think we're at the 25%. She's at the 25% recommendation, because next year we're going to see, this year there's a decrease because of a large amount of debt service that came off. Okay, that was debt excluded that we can't raise in the tax rate. And next year we're going to be seeing the impacts of some of these previously approved projects coming onto the tax rolls. So in our discussion and her recommendation, that leaves you the flexibility in future years to impact and mitigate some of that increase through changing the residential exemption.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
That does.
Okay.
It sort of, yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, I'd like to leave that room for later. It doesn't seem like a huge change in the tax bills this year because the rate went down, even though values and wind values went up a little bit.
And these are average numbers. I mean, that 1,336,000 for year-rounders, there's a significant amount that are below 500 in that.
So they'll be looking at $30, $40, not
Yeah.
70. You know, if you go.
Sitting on capital program committee, looking at the next 5-10 years and seeing some of the big projects that are coming in, whether it's sewer or roads or, DPW facilities, that type of thing. I like keeping it at 25% and have a little more room to grow up depending on if the assessments go down and tax rate goes up. And I like having a little bit of room because I can see what's coming down the line. And there's a lot of capital coming in the next 10 years.
And new growth might level off if we have a changing economy at all.
And I appreciate Jim's point and agree on the principle. It seems like knowing again what's coming up, this is the closest we can get to that. I think having not minimizing impact on residential. So I would agree with the 25%.
Okay, so I think it just requires a vote.
I need close to anybody from the public like to speak on this? Tobias?
Thanks. Sorry, it's nice to see that this has come to fruition, actually, that we have the movement to go to 35%. Because I remember having a lot of conversations with Matt way back when to get here. So it's really nice hearing the board taking like a nice conservative policy, knowing that there's going to be future expenses. And, Jim, I like your sentiments and the idea of having some sort of policy. And so to kind of reiterate that, I have a question for you, Deb. If the impact on all residents at 25% is $77, and you compare that to the previous slide where you have growth in property values proportionately, if you gain 6% on property value, right, and then the residential exemption maintains the same at 75%, in proportion to your value, your tax increase is not significant at all at $77. It's minuscule considering your property value has gone up 6% and you're only paying, $77 on average for that. It's practically flat. Does that make sense to you, Paul?
Yep.
Yes. Thanks, Tobias.
Anybody else from the public like to speak on this? Okay, we'll close the public hearing. Pleasure of the board.
I'd make a motion to have the same 25% exemption and 1.7 shift.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any? Nope. Yep. That carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank
In
you,
the
Doug.
next
And
couple of
I'm
weeks,
going to save my, sorry.
we will be asking you to electronically sign the form in Gateway, as you did last year very well. So
I'm going to save my rate. The rate doesn't matter comment for later. I need that. And then the other thing I was talking, we were being math nerds over there. I was trying to say, how do you figure out, and I've got the formula here, but I need the number from Deb, is how do you figure out what is the average without a residential exemption? What percentage is it? What do they pay? Because when you get a residential exemption, you have a property that's worth less than the average property and the ones without quite a bit less, and then you get a big break on it. And so understanding that split, when we actually see it, it really is clear what the break is and how we get it. It really is from the exemption and from our valuations. So I think it's, we also, part of who we're representing, we're representing the year-round people, but we're also representing 80-something% who pay a lot of the taxes. So you have to be cognizant of, what's fair to everybody. And I think having that number split the way we talked about is just another good way to look at it. So,
thank you.
Thank you. Okay, town manager's report.
Okay, we've got our second round of first quarter budget reports for fiscal 19. I think we're going to start with the airport.
Good evening. Tom Rafter, Airport Manager. For Q1, the revenues at the airport were up 18%. The expenses were also up 18%. The good news is that the revenue number is much higher. So our revenues were up 1.4 million and expenses were up 868,000, increasing our net earnings over last year by $586,000. And after we transfer in the retained earnings from our other fund, the PFCs, and backing out our fuel surplus, or backing out the fuel, the surplus was $2.2 million, or $156,000 over last year. We also received our certified retained earnings, which were 2.1 million. So if you combine that with the surplus, the projected current fund balance is about 4.3 million. The significant increase in both revenue and expense is primarily driven by fuel. And if you look on the attached sheet, you will see that our fuel revenues are already at about 5.1 million with a cap on our revolver at 4 million. So our commission last night discussed and approved me to come and request we'll be going through the formal process to both this board and the FinCom for an increase in the cap for our revolver. And we're probably going to be looking at increasing that to about $5.2 million based on projections. And for those of you who have not heard, the latest news, JetBlue just announced yesterday that they're going to be adding 2 more cities next summer. So our traffic is going to be extremely busy, and we're in the planning process to try to accommodate those.
Was that going to
The two new cities are LaGuardia and White Plains.
Yeah, I was going to say the two other New York locations.
Yes, they're covering the entire New York market, just about,
I did
with
say
the
that.
exception of Newark.
Do we have to accept a bunch more New Yorkers? Is that, we have any choice in this matter?
Unfortunately, no.
Well, we're working our way to be the next Hamptons, I think. Wasn't that the article? So.
August 1st every year.
Tom, I had a quick question. I was just looking through this, and I saw, like you said, the fuel revenue is going way up. But what is the first quarter airport operations count? That seems to be way down. Is count people coming through?
Operations are actually, one operation is a landing, another is a takeoff. So the landings and takeoffs are down, but our enplanements are climbing now. What's happening because of the pilot shortages, airlines are using larger aircraft, so they're upgauging the airplane. We also received notice from JetBlue that in 2020 they'll be putting in a new airplane that'll be bigger as well.
Okay. Just seemed strange that the count was down, but fuel was way up.
Yeah.
Seems counterintuitive. But
well, and fuel's up in our corporate side and on the commercial side.
Okay.
It's up in price as well as
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's again why we're asking for an increase in the cap so that we have enough money to buy it going through the rest of the year.
Okay. Any other questions? Yeah. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Want to comment and sconce it, and we have Heidi here in place of Mark tonight.
Good evening. Not really. Basically, Mark, good evening. Heidi Holdgate, want to comment. We just wanted to let you know that our revenues were up for the first quarter of the fiscal year, mostly due to water connection fees in the system. We had about 18, and we're on track to probably double that in quarter 2. And one of the most interesting things is it's the fill-in of the connections. It's not like one neighborhood where we're seeing it. It's just all over the place. We're seeing new connections popping up. Any questions on that?
Is that something that is sort of directly related to building permits? Do you watch that at all? Or no, is it?
Not
there's
really.
no
it's
direct
just
relation?
The new owners coming in with their applications.
Mm-hmm.
I had one question. I was looking on the right side of these spreadsheets are really nice for all the budgets. And I noticed late fees 28%. Is that an industry standard? 28% of your revenue comes from late fees?
Well, we do charge our customers that don't pay us a $29 late fee each month, and we did that a few years ago, hoping that would get them to pay, but it doesn't.
Wow, it just stood out. I didn't know. Is that normal or always in the 20s? Wow.
Yeah.
Maybe you should raise those. See if, or maybe not. Right? If it went too high.
We could. Yeah.
That's all I had.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Okay. And Sconset? Sconset's pretty much in line with what we would expect. We are waiting to hear from the state regarding the merger. We expect that any day. Okay.
No questions for me?
I think I'm all set.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Heidi.
Thanks.
All right, our next and last is sewer.
And good evening, everybody. David Gray, sewer director. We seem to be right in line where we have been the last year or so. One of the bigger things that might stand out is some of the expenses, but those expenses had to do still with that sewer force main break. We're still seeing some residual stuff from that for especially having to have specialized equipment and rental equipment and specialty personnel come over to help with some stuff. Other than that, we seem to be on track. The sewer permits seem to be just about in line where they have been in the past. One of the changes that we've been seeing, a lot of houses are being moved, picked up and moved around. And those don't have a fee incorporated with them. So if someone picks up a house and moves it and they build another house back on that lot, there's no sewer connection fee. The way it's written now in the regulations, that may change going forward with regulations being rewritten and changed. We still have seen, and I think Heidi and those guys have seen it as well. We're down on our flows coming in. Our flow, we only peaked over 2 million just a couple of times this summer, and a lot of that has to do with the dry season. It was extremely dry all summer. However, now we're seeing flows where we're at 2 million or just over 2 million because of the rain. So, and the water conservation still from the force main seems to still be working. So some of our revenues are down, but it's because of water usage.
And how much of that flow is in infiltration, do you think?
Yesterday's flows, we hit 2 million gallons yesterday, and it was because of the rain. It's been so dry all summer, and then now the water can just get in pretty quickly. So even Sconset, we were seeing flows of 70,000 gallons extra just because of the rain.
On a dry day this week, what would it be? Would it be a million gallons?
We've been averaging 1.3, 1.4 in that area, which is pretty consistent to what we've been seeing. One of the things is still Surfside is still under full construction, the treatment plant. So we've had to do a lot of shifting around. So sometimes our numbers could be skewed. They could be lower than what they would have been the day before. That's because we had to move a whole tank from one area to another. So, but everything's still staying right about where it is. We are gonna see a really large increase in sewer permits coming up here in the next few months. We're getting ready to put Shimo online coming up in the next, once we get power out to the pump station. We'll be able to start releasing a lot of these other areas. Meadowview Hussey Farm's just about done, so there's going to be a huge increase in permits coming up in the next 6-8 months. Richmond's getting ready to come online, so some of the numbers that might be a little lower now it should flip over.
That was the question I was going to have on the permits.
Yeah, it got a little slow this summer, which is not unusual, but we're going to see a pretty big uptick here pretty soon. And it's exciting, though. These new areas are getting ready to come online. A lot of work's gone into these last few projects, so we should start to see some activity pretty soon. And C Street's online. We're actually operating C Street pump station, so I've been in talks with Libby. We'll have an open house or something at some point coming up, but all is good.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have some recommendations for the temporary reuse of the fire station property at 131 Pleasant Street. We have internally been reviewing options potentially for the use of that property in anticipation of the fire station project obviously being completed and the fire department moving from 131 Pleasant Street to right out here. There's a memo in your packet. Erica and Greg and I have met a few times to go over sort of some priorities for reusing the existing fire station building. They're listed in your packet there. The priorities are include what's listed there. It's not necessarily limited to those things, but those were the things that sort of rose to the top. There are some limitations on the property, including the sewer force main running through there. There is the municipal fueling station that's there now that will be relocated probably within the next 2 months. 2 years, sorry, thank you. It is close to the Sparks Avenue roundabout. The shape of the property is a bit awkward, and we do have a garage sort of shed structure at the edge of the parking lot. We've had SMRT architects take us through the building and give a kind of an overview of what sorts of things might trigger code upgrade, the need for code upgrades, things of that nature. So based on that input and based on just reviewing, throwing all options that we thought were reasonable together, there's a very large document that does span a couple of pages. We came up with 11 options. They're listed across the top. On the left-hand side, we listed sort of some criteria for each option. So we've got a summary of it, whether or not a meeting trailer would be placed at the site, some assumptions and determinations, some costs, which we categorized into minor costs being less than $500,000 and doesn't trigger code upgrades, major costs exceeding $500,000 and a trigger of upgrade, and then new construction, which would be major. Hurdles and site limitations as well, whether or not the current facility meets code and ADA compliance for the purpose that we were putting into our option, utility cost efficiency, pros and cons that we brainstormed, and then maybe there might be some other sort of issue that didn't really fit into those categories. I don't know that if you want us to go through every single option, but maybe just so the public can hear it, we talked about selling as an option. We talked about demolishing the current structure and using the property for a park and ride. We talked about year-round housing, which would necessitate new construction. We talked about renovating or constructing new seasonal dormitories. We talked about meeting space and file storage, which would be a renovation. Garage space and file storage, which would also be something of a renovation. We talked about moving a couple of municipal offices to the site, and this is where I think we've landed on as our recommendation, moving the public health office and the natural resource offices to the site, and I'll get back to that in a moment. We talked about moving the plus offices there, moving the finance offices there, renovating or constructing new for a senior center, renovating or constructing new for a community recreation center. So we went through the criteria for every one of those options, and we don't have specific cost information. The cost information that we came up with is based on either general knowledge or some input from the architect. So where I think we've landed is an option that addresses several current needs. It's option 7, moving, as I mentioned, moving the Public Health Department and Natural Resources Department to the site. In addition, we would secure a meeting trailer. We have a desperate need for public meeting space right now, and we've discussed acquiring a trailer that could potentially be deployed for something else in the hopeful not too distant future when we would potentially be done with it. Some assumptions and determinations that we made would include addressing a previously prepared facilities report, which indicates that the 3 East Chestnut Street building where the public health offices are now and the 2 Bathing Beach Road building where Natural Resources is now, both really need major renovations. And I don't know that we want to get too deep into that, but they are, I would almost call them failing buildings. They could be put together for better communications. It has enough space for both of their operations. We could house the Natural Resources boats in the fire station garage when needed. and the files could be co-located and also somewhat closer to the plus area, which there's a lot of back and forth there. We listed it as a major cost exceeding $500,000 because of the trailer cost. The trailer cost is roughly in the range of $300,000 to acquire it and get it here and get it set up.
How much did you say it was?
$300,000.
Okay, I think it's at $1 million. Okay.
Oh, not $1 million, no.
But that's not directly connected to public health, natural resources. It's just an additional.
It would be no, it's correct. But I mean, they could have their meetings there potentially, or some amount of meetings. But it would be public meeting space for, yeah.
How about just, can we repurpose Bathing Beach Road as the meeting space?
I don't think it's big enough. There are ADA issues there. It does have good parking, but in a flood situation, no, I think that would be a concern. So let me keep going through it. But I mean, we definitely welcome input from the board on this. There are some hurdles at the site. As I mentioned, the sewer force main. There are some costs to some renovations that are going to be needed internally for the departments to move. There is parking there. It's be accessible. It does move an office out of the downtown. Although we have heard more complaints that particular office is in town than out of town. The current facility does meet code and ADA compliance for these particular purposes. Would there be utility cost efficiencies? Medium, not a great deal, but it would eliminate 2 separately maintained buildings into 1 existing building. There are some pros. As I said, it addresses facility needs for 2 departments housed in buildings that need significant repairs. Links complementary functions, maximizes the location. There are some cons. There is a cost to renovate. We don't have a budgeted line item of any kind for that, so this would need to be probably a fiscal 20 capital item, which we've mentioned to the capital program committee. It's not a permanent home for these departments, and this is, again, a temporary, hopefully not more than 3 to 5 year situation, but we have also, as you know, said that about other departments that are still there well after that amount of time. We were thinking that the 2 Bathing Beach Road building with some renovation could be used for the community school, because they do activities for us at the tennis courts in the summer, and as well as maybe some other functions there, and that might be able to be a good location for them. There's a map in the packet just to orient you. I don't know if we need to really project that, but again, this is something that we thought we should put before the board, get your input. You don't necessarily need to make a decision tonight. You can certainly think it over, ask questions, we can potentially get more information, but in light of the activity going on here with the fire station moving, we thought we should start making plans to figure out what to do with the building rather than leaving it empty.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Where do I start? I guess my first thought would be I would rather see a solution that moved us toward more of an implementation of one of our strategic goals, whether that be housing, transportation, the environment. I don't see improving office as really improving the environment. I think it's, whatever money we put into this, if we reuse it for offices, is really sunk. It's a sunk cost. It's not gonna generate any revenue. It's not gonna really save any money. So, I mean, it'll improve probably the quality of the, work life for employees, which is important. But I guess I would rather see us look at something, and you're going to have to move at some point in the future. So I think it's appropriate to take some additional time to look at something that may have a benefit to one of our strategic plan items, personally.
I'll go last. Just responding to Jim's comments there. First of all, I really liked this little sort of decision, giving us the options to see what you were thinking. The only thing I would say I was looking for what would speak to our strategic plan as well, Jim. The only thing I would say about public health and natural resources being together is that I think, we've been talking about the sustainability office and the sustainability coordinator, and those are definitely two positions and two departments that I think would benefit from being in the same place. There's so much crossover between what they're doing in regards to the environment, and maybe that does become some kind of a home for a sustainability coordinator. It would make sense to me. I don't see, other than the housing, I don't see many that really can respond to the strategic plan, but I do like the possibility of those two departments being closer.
I think that it's been really cumbersome for the community, the current locations of both of those departments, and bringing them together and bringing them into Mid-Island would be a huge benefit. And I'm actually I think it's a good temporary fix in the fact that we need to address our offices in a more comprehensive way, which with our current strategic goals, I actually think jumping full on into that would pull us away from things. And this solves some issues for the time being as we continue, which I do still think we need to be on the path of thinking about the long term for town offices. But I want to make a really good crack at our 3 strategic priorities a little bit above that. I don't want to see this fire station move out and see this building sitting empty right in the heart of Mid-Island. So I thought it was pretty well thought out, and that it's a very good temporary solution, and we'll end up spending probably close to the same amount of money trying to keep that East Chestnut building going. It's in horrible shape. It has been for years. And I do hear a lot of complaints about the current location of the Board of Health and its accessibility for the people who need to use it on a daily basis, as well as Concom.
Yeah, I'll wait in. I think I support it if it's temporary, 3 to 5 years. I see it as a chance to it gives us an opportunity to renovate downtown and put some stuff back downtown, and and put the parking in and put the right things back in there that we couldn't do if we didn't do it. I think that this lot should be rental housing of some type. If you look across the street on this picture, to the right is where Nantucket Community Sailing is doing. They're using half of that lot just to the right, which is probably 1/5 of what we have to put in. To put in a ton of housing, and it looks really good. And it's the right place to put density. It's the right place to put people in housing. It's in the town. It's right in the town area. It's not car dependent. You could have people rent houses and not even need a car if they live there, depending what their job is. So I think that it's too valuable to be a parking lot. It's too valuable to be this use for very long. But I think this would buy time to put it into a high value use that is desperately needed. And I'm back to Bathing Beach Road, probably because I live near there, and grew up down on Jetty's Beach. But I think that's a great building, and it would, I think it could still serve the community school in the summer, because the right side of it is where they have the concession. And I think the room that's the office would be a great meeting room. And it might get flooded out a couple times, but if it's that bad and it's that crappy out, then we're not going to meet anyway. So I just think that we could save $300,000, could do this pretty quickly, and move it forward.
Thank you, Matt. I agree. Bathing Beach Road is actually a terrible building, but it'd be good for in season for community school, that type of thing. And then I like your idea of a meeting space. If it's so bad out, we're not meeting anyway, right? Because there's 15 inches of snow coming down. It looks like you've done, the town staff has done the due diligence. This is what we always ask for, a grid like this. And it looks like they weighed all the options. I like this option. I get kind of echoing what you guys said on my right. If it's temporary, I don't want 10 years from now we're having to put more money in that building to keep it up when we haven't addressed the problem of the issues of our town offices. I know it's not part of our strategic plan. We're trying to stay away. I think it's going to pull us away from there. But, the senior center and marijuana, like, things do come up that we still need to move on. So in a year or two, I do think we need to stop, at least on the capital program committee, we have a placeholder of $30 million for a new municipal building, and we just keep pushing it out and pushing it out and pushing it out and keep putting more money into our facilities. The one benefit that would be to the community is having public health natural resources in Mid-Island. They have quicker, easier access to it. So that is one benefit to the public.
I think that it's a legitimate one. That I use it more, or should be using it more for testing wells. I know Roberto's really trying to get wells tested, and the difficulty of getting them to him by 9:15 Tuesday mornings when it's in town. I think it could be alleviated if it was a little more accessible.
It doesn't sound like a big deal, but I've had that little water kit next to my sink,
and I really care.
For 4 months.
Yep.
You have to get the sample at 8:15 and drive it straight there to get it on that 9:15 boat.
There's no parking.
Yeah.
You can't pre-take the sample the night before.
Well, that's just really, the issues around that are just not parking and transportation. It's the lack of a water testing facility on the island. So that really brings up the question I'd asked Libby. Would you program a water testing laboratory into this space?
I don't know. We could
I'll give you the answer. If someone gave us a lot of money to do it, maybe.
and run it.
There you go. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I just ask one question to clarify too with the meeting room? Is that we're trying to recreate essentially a caliber meeting room like above, because we are losing that. Is that correct?
We're trying to create a meeting space that can fit, up to around 30 people, because we are largely losing that, not entirely, but it is going back to be the training room it was meant to be from day one, and the meeting space needs to be set up for video and sufficient space for people to sit and staff to be there and board members. And all,
Yeah, I've heard a couple comments about connect this to our strategic plan. We might need to move these here and think about the next step to get to the strategic plan. I know that's a long shot, but, to have a municipal building, to move those things away, and then we could decide what we want to put at that fire station. Right? Is it a water testing facility? Is it housing, like Matt was saying?
There's an opportunity to put housing above any other use,
right?
Which is something we've been talking about any new buildings should have both components.
Yeah.
But occupying it now will preclude our ability to develop that space without moving them again. So we would have to find another temporary. That's having done this a lot. I mean, it's so appealing when you see space. But it just
the electric company property.
Yeah. So
which was temporary. We'll move back downtown, and we're going to save money. It hasn't been temporary. Right. We haven't moved back downtown, and it costs us more money there because of the utility bill than it cost in the two buildings we had previously. Now it's bigger and it gives us more space and it's more convenient for the people that live on this side of town, but it isn't, sort of what we thought. So I think Jim's right. How do you plan out your next step?
You keep it. I mean, if you don't occupy it, or you make it storage or something, because if you put offices there, you will have to find another place for them before you can develop that space. Right.
But we can't redevelop downtown without getting rid of some of the buildings either.
It's a crazy little.
Well, were we gonna develop the bathing beach? Do we have a plan to put a building down to the bathing beach road? I haven't heard one.
No, I'm talking about East Chestnut.
Do we have a plan for Chestnut? I mean, if somebody said, "Yeah, here's our plan for Chestnut," just kind of it's the reverse of the fire station. Here's our plan for Chestnut. We have an immediate need to do this. It's going to solve all these problems. We need to temporarily move, Public Board of Health out there and do that work, and then we can move them into their new space. But that's not what we heard today. That's my concern.
Wouldn't Board of Health and Natural Resources be the plan to move into a new building here eventually with the rest of Plus?
Well, you tell me. Okay, the town administration has repeatedly put forward recommendations and ideas for new municipal space, either downtown or out of town. And so far, nothing has taken hold. So yes, potentially there could be a new building out here. There could potentially be some sort of a redo downtown, but it seems like that is even right now years away, and we have falling down buildings that our departments are in. I understand some of the concerns that are here about the strategic plan and all, but the East Chestnut building is a total disgrace, and it is not even healthy for our employees to be in there. So we're trying to accomplish a couple of things: better space, more convenience for the public, less cost. I mean, this is a kind of impossible situation here.
Yeah. And any new buildings are going to be massive overrides. And how many things are we going to ask for at once? Are we going to ask for an island home, a senior center, 2 new giant municipal buildings, and whatever the future plan is for the fire station, along with road improvements? And we're going to have to phase these out.
I just don't want us to think that by doing this, we're in a 3 to 5 year time frame. It's 10 years. I mean, when did we move to 2 fairgrounds? How many years ago was that? Is that
Over 10.
I think it's
15 years
definitely
ago?
more than 3 years.
So it's 10
if
years.
we do this.
And it's going to be 10 years before they move again. So, by doing this, we curtail other options for development.
Do we take the $3 million that I didn't agree to earlier tonight and turn and sink this into housing here? I mean, here's a perfect piece of land that we already own, that it's a perfect location to put housing in. We could have it up in a couple years. The rent would, if you put $3 million up, the rent would cover anything we'd have to pay for it. So I'm just throwing that as one idea that we're precluding, just to follow Jim's thought process. Is that more important than what we're talking about?
Good question.
I think the time frame is key, because 3 to 5 years, with the amount of money that would have to go into it to just make it offices, 3 to 5 years seems like it would be worth it. If it's less than that, then the amount of money that goes into it, would be the question I have, is if it's less than 3 to 5 years that they would be in there, then how much money are we really putting into it? But when you're talking about 10 years, I mean, I think there is a better ultimate use for this, but I wouldn't want to see it empty. But I would also want it to see it be done and put to the best use, and that's going to take time. So that's, my question would be to what is a realistic time frame, not based somewhat on what has happened in the past, but also in our ability to come up with a plan for it. And I think housing is a fantastic idea, but again, who is going to take the lead on that? That could be something the Affordable Housing Trust does, but I don't think it precludes the funding that we talked about earlier.
No, that's sort of the point I'm making too often about the Affordable Housing Trust in particular. I think what I sense sometimes is that people think that that there's these grandiose ideas, but there isn't the work backing it up. And we don't know who's going to do it, and everyone is sort of happy with what they do already, and so they think that money will solve it, and we'll spend this money, and someone else will do it. Well, spending money doesn't guarantee you're going to get work, and so so with a vision, that has to be larger, and then tying it back to here, I think it's my hope is that the Affordable Housing Trust pulls all the different groups together and has the vision and says, here's how they're going to work together. Here's the entity that's going to check people in and do that part. Here's who's going to rent it. Here's who's going to maintain it. Here's what it costs to do that. Because we aren't going to be able to do any of this stuff unless we actually, it's not wishful thinking, it's hard work. And so unless we have people in there to do the work, then it's not going to solve itself. And we can't tackle something like this, which is exactly what we should really be doing. I mean, that's, in my opinion, it's right across the street, probably 12 rooms, 14 rooms on something 1/5 the size. You could, if it's 12 rooms and we could get 60 or 80 with stuff on the first floor, and it was all rental with 25% affordable, we've just solved our shy. We're done. and we've put it in the exact right place. You know, so I think housing has to really, if we're going to take a focus on it, we have to really take a focus on it. So, and that's part of why I didn't agree tonight earlier, because of things like this, and because I'm not sure that we are taking a big enough vision of it.
Well, I mean, it's certainly within our strategy to do something with housing. My recollection is, I remember years ago, Andrew, I thought, put forward some concepts. We were talking about selling that property to have liner retail buildings with housing above. Does anybody remember that?
I was part of discussions 2 different times.
And do you know more about that? I mean,
I believe that involves selling the property, and the entity that would come in and develop it would potentially have done that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, early on, this was my first go around, was like 2002 or so, and Finn Murphy and I think they had approached Stop and Shop and had got to a number, but we couldn't go further than that. And then a number of years ago, sort of, what are we at now? 18, so probably 6 years ago, 2012. There were discussions between a couple entities with Stop and Shop and DJ, who owns next to the Boys and Girls Club, and there was a discussion of trying to pull all that together, and this was part of that puzzle, and that didn't go anywhere. So it's been talked about as liner buildings. It's been talked about as the Stop and Shop needing the back sort of third of that, because they don't have enough
for their
dockage and stuff, and they don't have a great flow through to their dockage area. They have to get to it from the front of the property. So, you know, and they're claiming that they don't need it, but, you know, they may need it. They just didn't really like the price and didn't like what was going on with DJ. So I think there's, you know, it's a difficult situation. If we put, you know, if we develop the back 2/3 and, you know, put out the front third of it next to Stop and Shop to bid, I bet they would put a lot of money up for it. You know,
I mean, potentially we'd have less of a NIMBY reaction to development of housing there than we did at Six Fairgrounds. We could do another Six Fairgrounds, do an RFP, and see what developers came up with.
Well, this is only about a third of the size. Just in context.
No, I understand. I mean, no, it's not. Should I say, when I said another Six Fairgrounds, I should have said another use of municipal property for the development of affordable housing, not done and not run by the town, but done by a developer.
Understanding how the finances on that work now, I think the town should be having a housing development arm and doing it. These guys are going to have their money out in 3-4 years, and they're going to have all their profit out, and the tax benefits from this are enormous, and you're selling those to somebody. So if the town entity did it, instead of the way it went, it would be $4 or $5 million coming back to the town for the next thing. And so that's when I talk about, you know, thinking big enough and putting it together. You know, we should be thinking that way. We should be taking what we learned from this about the finances and using those finances to our own benefit, you know. And I think that's, you know, and we're not going to solve that tonight, just talking about it, but I think we should be thinking more along those lines, not hoping that someone else will come and solve it for us. We need to solve it ourselves, and we need to, you know, actually get people together and not just talk about getting people together, get them together and get it figured out. So,
I mean, it may be worth pitching this to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and saying, here's, you know, what would you do with this if we gave this to you? I mean, what is that? You know, what is that? Take a month or you know, a month or two? I mean, I think it's worth, you know, I think it's worth doing.
I think it's
just to have the exercise, because they're looking for opportunities for development, and I think it just I don't know, that's just mine.
So I want to throw something out there for us to think about. I love the idea of having some kind of housing there, whether it's Affordable Housing Trust or we do it, or what you were saying, Matt, because you want to think bigger. In conjunction with that, we have to figure out what we're doing with 2 Fairgrounds Road, what we're doing with 20 South Water. It's a terrible building just sitting there. Nothing against sheriff and everybody who's there, but East Chestnut needs to be ripped apart, needs to be just bulldozed. It's a terrible building. And it's you know, if you move this here, if we bring town offices to 20 South Water and 16 Broad, if that's what we have to do, then let's do it, so we can figure out what goes at 2 Fairgrounds Road. Waco's at 37 Washington, and all these pieces are connected. So before we made a bigger decision on, you know what needs to be housing, which is connected to our strategic plan, I think we need to figure out. I know it's a big, it's a huge endeavor, but it's something that's been kind of talked about since 2012. I've seen the plans that, that was done and engineered for 20 South Water.
We've been talking about municipal office space for 30 years.
Okay, so way longer than 2012. So I just want to
almost as long as the fuel tanks.
Right.
This may.
I don't know if you had Brooke had a question, Jason.
Yeah.
This just may be a good opportunity to be able to phase some of these office moves by utilizing this property for the short term. And the short term in government, yes, is 5+ years potentially. And we do also still have a lot of property over here to be developed as housing.
Brooke.
Hi, I'm Brooke Moore, currently Vice Chair of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. I'm salivating at the idea of our having an opportunity to do something with this piece of property. It is, as you have all noted, ideal as a walkable community location for housing, and versus municipal offices that could be put in a lot of different places as well. And to Matt's comment, I just want to say, Rita was talking about our strategic plan and how much it's in process, but one of the things that we have intended as a council of advisors, and we would like to mine the experience of our summer residents and year-round residents with regard to financing and the various options in terms of RFPing it out to someone else, doing it ourselves, and the financing behind that. So we're already headed down that road. So I would just like to put a vote in for setting this aside at some point for housing, and whether that is using it temporarily for offices with a strict deadline of sorts, where it would turn over at a period of time, and in the process we could work on a development for housing during that temporary use for office, with a 3 to 5 year time horizon for actually building housing. So that would be my input. Thanks.
So I'll make a motion that we give the Affordable Housing Trust Fund 2 months to noodle over this, and if they're interested, come back and make us a proposal. That's my motion.
Sorry.
You missed the whole motion?
Yes.
So I made a motion that we give the Affordable Housing Trust Fund 60 days, based on the conversation they've heard tonight, to quote, noodle over this development opportunity and come back to the board with some preliminary ideas and findings before we make a final decision on moving something else in there.
A second for discussion? Okay, no second.
Also, I thought you did. I will. I'll second.
Oh, you said, okay. Matt, second for discussion. Rita, you had your...
Right. So I very much appreciate the sentiment. And again, I think that, having, a trust, again, that can be trusted, a trust that can be trusted, is a big change. However, I feel that taking 2 months to look at this specific piece of property right now with the holidays and our strategic plan review and preparing for town meeting and the presentation that we want to give this board and be able to prepare for town meeting, I think would be distracting us from our ability to focus on the plan that is going to allow us to thoughtfully figure out what we would do with this. I do think that town properties are completely untapped potential for the Affordable Housing Trust. But I think the Affordable Housing Trust could look at every single one of the town's properties, figure out which of the 5 could really be housing, and come up with plans for those. And I think that would be a fantastic exercise. But I also think, sort of concomitant to that, we have to do exactly what Jason was saying and assess all of our properties and understand how they fit into the bigger picture of what we need to do the next 30 years. So that would be my only concern. I absolutely appreciate the sentiment. If it was more than 60 days, I would say yes, but 90?
Do you want to make friendly of.
I worry.
It's going to take 90 days to figure out what it's going to cost to renovate it. And then we're going to have to talk about, if you move the people in there, and we're going to have more code requirements than we realized. And so,
I just find it ironic that we need $3 million for the Affordable Trust Fund to move quickly, and then we have something that is a analysis of something square feet that we need that, that developers and real estate people do in a few hours every day.
Yeah. So,
I think that I understand your sentiment, Rita, but I think that you get the right people and they'll have that answer to you in a week.
I'm trying to be supportive of the trust fund, and I think I'm trying to give an opportunity, and I'm disappointed that we're not.
Well, let me take it to the trust. I think it's unfair for us to be a month away from trying to focus, to sit here and say 60 days and we'll jump it. Maybe we can. All I'm saying is that we sit up here all the time and say, what is distracting us from a strategic plan? We're not going to let that happen. I'm trying to be aware of, again, this trust has worked so hard to get to where we are, and to have the select board that is supportive, which is amazing, but then to say, focus on what we want you to focus on now, forget your strategic plan. The Affordable Housing Trust needs to be their own entity with their strategic plan that is cohesive with our plan, but not kowtowing to select board's whims on their time frame. So that's all.
We're not characterizing the motion as a whim.
No, I don't think it's a whim. And I think it's a huge positive. All I was doing is being protective of the time that we have and the expectations that this board would have. So
now we're being really supportive.
Yeah, exactly.
Tucker?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate Select Board Member Higgins, being mindful of all the different things that the trust fund is trying to do. I will say that, I think to have an analysis, to have the opportunity to look at this property, do some analysis, I personally believe that we can do that, and I'll say I can be doing that within that 60-day time frame, so that as you're looking at all of the different possibilities for this property, that you hopefully will have the most useful and complete data to make the best decision that you can.
Thank you, Tucker. David, do you want to talk about the force main before we
quickly,
vote?
I just wanted to bring everyone's attention back to where the force main lies. Yep. The force main runs right across this piece of property right here. It's 18 inches deep to the top of the pipe. That currently is our only standby force main that we have for the entire system. There's also a gravity system that runs across the entire front lawn and goes down West Creek that takes this whole neighborhood as sewer. Just so you know, just to kind of give you an idea where to limit if you want to try to do any work, that sewer main there is near and dear to my heart. So I just needed to point out where it actually sits. Yeah. It's only to be used as a standby emergency right now, but that's our only second force main until we do something in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, there are a few more limitations on this property than you would, just initially say with all of the road frontage and the sewers. And so
it'll be good to see.
Is the sewer an easement? Is that what we would have to keep?
We own it.
Oh, okay. So, sorry, not an easement, but do we have to keep it clear? Do we have to build around it? Yeah, on it.
No pavement, no nothing.
You'd have parking and things.
I don't think you can have parking on it. They don't have
Well,
parking
the
on
ramp is on it right now, on a portion of it, but you can't build a structure. You
No, I
have to be able to
understand,
dig it up and access it if it needs it.
And no trees.
No trees.
Right. But we're also talking about replacing it. Yes. So that constraint, if that happens, goes away.
If we can get a quorum, yeah.
I just want to say,
at town meeting.
Town meeting.
Yeah.
So, one more comment before we take a
just
vote?
that, and again, my comments aren't to, I very much appreciate the support for the Affordable Housing Trust. And if Tucker thinks it's feasible, then I'm happy to do it. I just, again, want us to be able to have a fantastic strategic plan to present to this board.
Okay. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, the motion passes. Carries unanimously.
And the motion was for 90 days now.
Yeah, 90.
90.
Yep. Okay. Libby, traffic safety? Or did you have anything else? Did you want anything else, direction or anything from us, Libby, on?
No, I guess we're not moving any offices and not getting any additional meeting space unless we somehow look at other options for not using this property. So we'll attempt that, but it's going to require an investment of funds.
I didn't think that we precluded that. I thought we just wanted to see potential future housing opportunities.
Well,
what was the timeline that you were thinking on that?
Well, there's a capital request involved, right? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, we can't really do anything at the site much until we have some funds anyway. But I don't know why we'd move forward with any office things if we're going to say the housing works out and everything's a great
we can't do anything now.
site. So, but if you do, then I would imagine you'd want to move sooner rather than later. So I don't know that we'd spend $500,000 or so moving town offices there.
300,000 of that is a trailer, which we could move and park out here if we had to, right?
Well, maybe.
Let's see what the trust fund has, and I think we'll have.
And how much longer are the firemen going to be in the current building? They're not going to be here till the summer, right?
I think it was more
summer.
But was the idea to take something to
June.
town meeting?
May, June, that's what I was guessing. Okay.
Yes. We're trying to put something in capital.
Okay.
See if we get to town meeting.
So 90 days would be an issue for that.
Well, Tucker said 60, so I think it's a little fluid right now. I don't.
Yeah, we're probably.
Yeah, but I'm just saying I don't want to set this idea completely aside because I think we do need to look at, and maybe we need to put it on an agenda to look at the big picture of all the town offices and how you can move all the pieces to get to where we absolutely need to be within a much shorter period than people are
that's a day of people sitting here and doing that.
Sounds like a fun day.
It's all there, but it's a lot.
It's a lot of decision making. Yep.
I think we need to have that as part of our strategic planning considerations, whether we do that or not.
Run a session.
So.
What? What do you mean?
Just earlier we talked about the fact that that's not part of our strategic plan. The redo of all the bill.
I was saying it would be.
I'm saying so we need to look at our strategic plan and see if we want to revise it to incorporate that as we look forward the next couple of years.
No, we've always said that things like facilities and other things coming at us are not precluded by the strategic priorities of broad goals that we want to accomplish. In adopting the strategic plan, it never crossed my mind that we would not be moving things forward with town facilities, including the island home and.
I guess I wasn't being really clear. What I was trying to say is to add something like housing, which is part of our strategic plan, we would need to look at the whole picture of all the town offices. So it would be necessary.
And it would be a strategic initiative. It would be like housing is. So it's not just let's move some offices temporarily. So
it is
and I think it's worth taking a large look at it.
Mm-hmm. So just to be clear, Don, you don't want to stop the train moving with option 7, is what you're saying. Like we can still move forward.
I still think we should discuss what would need to go in place to do that. I don't think examining it for housing precludes that. But.
I would agree.
Well, thank you. I guess we don't want to spin our wheels pursuing an option that isn't really going anywhere. Right. So for the moment, we could potentially continue on with the placeholder that I think we have in for fiscal 20 for the office/trailer idea. And then in 60 days, if we're not doing that anymore, then we can not do that anymore. Or substitute it for some housing sort of feasibility study thing. Or I haven't really thought it through entirely right now.
I think the vote was we want to take the opportunity to look at this as an opportunity for housing now before we make decisions about a temporary reuse that's going to be at least 3 to 5 years. That would preclude any. I mean, that was the purpose of my motion. That's so, you know.
Well, I'm having a concern because I don't want to miss the opportunity to put something forward for town meeting. So I'm
Well, then
I'm reconsidering my vote.
That's fine. No,
I mean, I think that they could give us an answer. Like someone can do an analysis. Andrew could probably do this on a napkin. How many units could go here?
We took the vote. If somebody wants to make another vote, that's fine.
Can I just clarify where my head's at about this in terms of timing? I see no issue myself with this being used for offices if that's the most immediate need, with a commitment to it maybe going to housing, you know, in 3 to 5 years. The housing issue isn't going to get solved by this individual piece of property or the $3 million we're asking for this in this fiscal cycle for other opportunities to develop housing. The housing need is huge, and one does not preclude the other. So I'm not saying that we should stop what we've asked for earlier this evening to pursue this, because I see this as a longer-term strategy rather than an immediate-term strategy. The immediate-term strategy is one the Affordable Housing Trust Fund has already developed and made a request for. So I don't want to see option 7 bypassed because we've brought up housing tonight. But I would love to see housing on the table as the secondary plan, perhaps, for this piece of property. So
that's more of where I'm coming from.
Yeah. I think they can move in line together. We're not going to make any decisions.
Okay.
Then we should take a vote on that, because that's.
Your vote wasn't to stop moving the town.
We don't have a vote on option 7, though.
Right.
Well, I would make a motion to put things in place to pursue option 7, and we can always change that as time goes on. But if we don't think about putting things forward for town meeting, we'll miss that opportunity, and that building will end up sitting empty because even pursuing housing will take a number of years to get a shovel in the ground there.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those
No.
out there? No. 4-1. Okay. Anything else, Libby, on that?
Can I just
no? I guess not at present. But the deadline issue, I understand. We'd want offices out, say the housing worked out, but we're going to really need a plan in place for where they're going to go.
Right. So they'd have to move a couple times if it's 3 to 5 years.
Can I make a quick suggestion or a thought? We do have an affordable housing meeting this coming Tuesday, and I don't know if this is something that I can bring to the board. It can be discussed there, and others can have a look at the deadline and feasibility of what we can provide in, we'll say, 60 days. If it's a conversation about how many units could we fit there, that could be more straightforward. In my mind, I'm thinking, what's the best and highest use? What does this look like if we were really doing it right? Which to me takes longer. If it's a matter of, is it 20 units or 10 units? I mean, I think we can have that pretty quickly. I don't know how valuable that will be when we don't have a bigger plan with our other properties, but it can be done. And maybe we can do more. Maybe I'm being a little too conservative. So I would say we have a meeting on Tuesday, and I don't know if we can bring this up again after that meeting and I have a little more information and feedback on what we can provide.
Thank you, Rita. Libby, do you want to move on to traffic safety, or do you?
Sure.
Do you need anything else from us on this?
I don't know.
Okay, we'll talk about it next
I'll
week.
come back if I do. Hopefully we have Mr. Burns here who can review the Traffic Safety Committee recommendations.
This is a bit different format, but I'm assuming you went through the material in your packet. We essentially vote. Whoa. Okay, we essentially voted first to eliminate parking along the southeast corner of Mycomet Road between Surfside and Oricomie. The problem, I don't know if there's pictures in the packet, but the problem is there were parking on both sides of the road, which has obstructed the road. We thought it was best, since there was some demand for parking along this section of road, that we limit it to one side.
that side being a vacant, those vacant parcels along the north side. I believe that's conservation land. It was a bit more appropriate. I can answer any other questions you have.
Did you discuss eliminating it on both sides?
Yes.
Because I've been driving down there a fair amount recently, and I consistently see like 7 or 8 cars parked there that apparently seem to be parked there more permanently than short-term parking. And if it's going to remain parking, I think it should be developed into something that has parking limitations, like 1 or 2 hours. Yep. It's not right now what's happening there. It's not appropriate to be parked on the side of conservation land. And essentially people are taking them as their permanent parking spaces.
There's definitely spillover that was happening to the area. This is just a method of controlling that and at least keeping the road itself open for traffic, which was the problem originally.
Would you like to start off with one side, or would you like it to be a 2?
I just thought, I don't know what the rest of the board thinks, but you should take a drive down there.
I guess for now, I'd rather take the recommendation of this traffic safety. And if you want to bring it back as an agenda item based on some other, so I'd make a motion that we approve the recommendation of the Traffic Safety Committee.
I'll second it.
For Mycomber Road.
Correct. Yep.
And the comment I'd like to make on this is the problem that we're having isn't in most of these areas it's a design issue with the buildings and things. When something's designed properly, there's on-street parking, there's places for cars to go, it works. When it isn't designed properly, sort of one end of Essex Road, Macy's Lane, etc., the cars are parked everywhere, and those are the places that we get our biggest complaints about. The places that control the number of vehicles and give them all their own places to park, those developments are welcoming and people like living there. And I think what we're seeing is a little bit of like you said, it's an overflow. It's people just leaving them for the winter, leaving them for a long, and we're going to see it in some of the other things we're going to deal with tonight or tomorrow. And I think this is, we have sort of a design and a layout issue on a lot of these projects.
This one would be better if it had on-street parking on that side. If the parking is going to be allowed there, it should be actually created there.
I would also say this is an issue as a result of a lot of these are single-family homes, but they might have 4 bedrooms, and all of the bedrooms being rented out, so you have 4 adults with 4 cars. And this is part of our affordable housing issue. So you have more cars, really, than what was intended for the original design.
And that's what they're doing. I know there's talk of having a rental registry, and they do a rental registry. They do a rental registry up in Amherst, and part of what the homeowners have to give, they have to give their plot plan, they have to show how many cars it can fit and where they go, and they have to give their phone number. So when there's an issue, a bunch of kids having a party, you know who to call, and they can come and they can correct it, and they can find them. We don't have that, and so some of these areas just become sort of parking yards, and I think it's, we're going to have to come to grips with it at some point.
Okay. Take a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Okay, accessible parking space.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is from Commission on Disability. They had requested an additional accessible space along Liberty Street. This basically repurposes a 2-hour parking space along Liberty Street, closest to the accessible entrance to the Methodist Church.
Yeah, I'm all for this, but you answered my question. I didn't know if it was for a residential homeowner or if it was for...
It's open for anyone with a placard, but
yep.
The idea...
For the church, yeah.
Okay. Through Commission on Disability, yes.
Are they going to pull themselves right up on the sidewalk there?
I think you have to, don't you?
I'm just asking.
You see it right in the aerial photo there.
Right, you're condoning it. I've got it on the record that you're agreeing with it.
As long as it's not obstructing the passage on the sidewalk, I believe.
Yeah,
that's how
no
we,
way you can get a stroller in between, so.
Motion to,
Yep, go ahead.
motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carries unanimously. One more.
This is on Ash Street. The board took action some time ago about limiting parking on this section of sidewalk. You can see there's access to a basement along a dwelling unit that the homeowner had difficulty utilizing because of a parking space and a car parked on this extremely narrow section of sidewalk. We agreed that that was troubling. However, the abutter across the street did follow up with a request that they also had issues accessing their driveway. And you see in the picture there the vehicle that may be obstructing. The vehicle across the street, the property across the street actually had trouble accessing their property and requested just removal of that third parking space. The section of parking between along Ash Street from Center Street to the driveway now is about 60 feet, roughly, a little shorter than that, which can accommodate 3 vehicles. Removing that, extending that yellow line 20 feet towards Center Street would eliminate that third parking space and still provide enough space for 2 vehicles, and would allow both property owners to access their property the way they're requesting to access them.
Did this go through unanimously through traffic safety?
I believe so.
Yeah.
The house with the garage is where I grew up.
Yep.
As a kid.
I noticed that, yeah.
And that's.
I looked at the property history, so. Yeah.
And it is very different. Like back then, my mom and dad used to park right in front of our house. There were not cars parked long-term parked all day or all year there with the residential stickers, like some of the cars that are here. The cars that people had were nowhere near as wide as what you see parked here.
Yeah.
And my dad would go use that garage. He had an old car. He had a 1930 Model A that he'd put in the garage in the winter, and it got really bad. And he'd pull it out in the summer and use it for the summer. And that
nice and narrow. So
yeah, that's all you
perfect
need.
for Ash Street.
You know, it was big enough. So. And I went to look to make sure the neighbors were planning to use it, and they have an empty garage with a couple doors in it. So I think they are actually going to use it. I didn't want to take it away if they actually weren't going to move anything into it. If it was like my garage would be full of restaurant equipment, I would have said don't bother. But it's empty and ready for a car, so I support it.
I will note too that Mr. Perry sent an email, and I did forward it on. I don't know if everyone had a chance to read it.
I did, but when I get those, I like to take my car down myself to see if I can park, and I didn't get that. Came at 4:04 today, so I didn't get that in time. But I did that on the last one. I could actually get my car in pretty easily on that parking space we took away. But so I'll make a motion to approve this.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Mike.
The only other comment I will make, it's in our other packet, is that the property I grew up in did add a on-street parking space to the right. You know, you're seeing the door of the garage to the right there. They've cut in an off-street space,
yeah, off-street parking,
which was part of what took us. Yeah. Oh, there you go. So that took one space away, and because we have, and my theory on this is we've turned all the yards into parking yards because people can't find a place on the street. You know, if in fact we, had used demand management and managed it, we would still have a lot of these gardens. We'd have a lot of these gardens, and a lot of these side yards wouldn't be parking yards.
So how many cars did the Fee family have when you lived there?
They had a couple, but it's yeah. So. Yeah, I'm just saying, but it's happened all over town. I know all those properties. You walk around town, there's hardly any that kept their side yard because people couldn't park near their house, so they had to put a off-street parking space. And when they put it in, it takes at least one, sometimes 2 spaces away. So I agree with this, but it's a bigger issue for us to tackle, and hopefully through the steps we've taken, we'll start to be able to turn that around a little bit.
Okay, moving on to select board reports, comments. We review, approve letters to zoning board of appeals in connection with Surfside Crossing 40B application. We have 2 letters. One is a supplemental comment letter for original application, and then a second one is a comment letter on the modified proposal. Libby, do you want to?
So I drafted these in conjunction with the consultants that we engaged specifically for environmental and hydrogeological, as well as assistance from town council and the ZBA's 40B consultant. The idea here was that since we didn't have the consultants when you wrote your initial comment letter on July 13th, that if there were any recommendations or comments that came out of the reviews, we would put them into a supplemental comment letter. So that comment letter is in your packet. It's been reviewed by the groups that I mentioned. And I think today I might have gotten a minor edit from the environmental, but I think it was just a typo correction. And the traffic was rather detailed. I didn't actually entirely follow the whole thing, but I just pretty much cut and pasted what that came out of the traffic report. And the idea here would be that the original comments, I think the idea is the original comments stand, and this just supplements that initial letter.
Any comments, edits, changes? Matt? Sorry.
I'll let Dawn.
I was just going to ask about the swimming pool addition.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And
Thank you.
if we know if that's actually even a viable request
Okay, that
in regard
came
to
from
public health.
a board member, and actually I did, thank you for bringing that up. I did talk with the public health director this afternoon, and he indicates that for a swimming pool that's used by a number of people, like a public pool situation, that that actually would not be legal.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
I think, and so I didn't think about it from that perspective, because natural pools are used all over Europe for public facilities for hundreds of people. So my understanding of natural pools where they use a phosphorus filter is that they're absolutely fine for public. And there are people on island who do natural pools, so I didn't realize that it would not be considered feasible or legal here. But yeah, my understanding is that they're used often for municipal facilities and public facilities. So.
I just don't know if they are in the United States.
Yeah, I'd have to double, like, again, residential, absolutely.
Yeah, it was just a
But,
question.
yeah, no, and again, I didn't even think of that because I hadn't thought of it outside of that context. But
Is that something we want to edit or take out or leave in?
well, I think, I don't know that there's any harm in leaving it in. It's really more of, and this actually was a great suggestion that came from Matt, but it's a discussion that he and I have had, where pools really are having an impact on our water quality, and considering natural pools does improve water quality in the way that they're maintained. So I think it's good to have it in. If it's not legal, it's not legal.
Any idea how much more expensive they are than?
About 50% more.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
It all depends on your design.
Right.
And how much swimming area you want. So
okay.
Up to 50.
And then how about the maintenance?
Maintenance, again, so it's going to range. Some of the residential maintenance is going to be less. At the municipal scale, it's probably going to be similar, but it's never more.
And you have to realize that what's happening now is how we deal with them now is not sort of the proper way. You don't see tankers coming around when they have to empty. They're emptying these things into the lowest part of their own yard, or and so with all the different things that might entail.
Yeah.
And there's a misnomer that saltwater pools are better. They're actually worse than chlorine pools. Chlorine pools, you can let them sit for 7 or 10 days, test them again, and it's inert water, and you actually could put that out relatively safely. You can't with a saltwater pool.
So I suppose actually what you're reminding me of is perhaps what we're really asking for, if the intention is to protect water quality, is that in lieu of a natural pool, that there's some sort of recommendation made about the upkeep and maintenance of the pool, that it be drained with a tanker as opposed to being drained into a sewer, because that's really the intention behind it. I don't
It's
know
the
the exact
drainage of
wording,
it,
but both either Roberto or Jeff would be able to put that into the appropriate words.
You know, the points, I made a couple points to Libby. One of mine is, I think, from a planning perspective, like a sort of new urbanist view, is you want things to be about a third of a mile from services. You want it to be a 10-minute walk. That's what people will do and not get in their vehicles. If I did a rough calculation, and this is, you know, closing in on a mile from the Mid-Island. So it really isn't, I would love to, you know, have that sort of comment in it, because I think this is in the countryside. This isn't, this is all car dependent. Whatever goes there is going to take vehicles to go and do your shopping and then go do everything. And it's disingenuous to say, oh no, you've got some commercial down the street a little bit. There's no place to shop. There's a store and a bar and a couple, a liquor store. I mean, it's not, it's not a commercial node. There's nowhere to shop. So I think that would be important. I think on the traffic side of things, the consultants are saying 5% on top of a 1% doubling. A letter that we received from Jock Zemicki, he counted the cars that are in that area, and it ended up being, I think, 0.9 something per bedroom, and we're adding X amount of bedrooms here. It would add almost twice as many vehicles as are already in Surfside. So I think that question has to be answered. I think his analysis was it was as credible or more credible than any of the consultants we have who are they're taking like sort of averages, and from wherever he went and walked around and counted the bedrooms and counted the cars in that entire neighborhood. It's the most up-to-date numbers we could have. I think that's important. And you guys all remember the letter. There was, they were talking bedrooms per acre of 28 or 20 were the bedrooms per acre. And then you say, that's so many cars per acre. And places like, and then you look at other places like have a lot less. I think it's, 4 or 5 an acre at Beach Plum. So there's a big disparity, and I think that should be noted. So those were kind of the comments I've made previously. And I think it's in there on the storm scepters. We sort of are suggesting now swales, and it's interesting that swales a few years have to be emptied. The stuff we put down by the wharf, that's with the cat and nine tails and stuff, that's supposed to be emptied. The storm scepters have to be emptied, and there's a protocol for emptying them. That you have to take out the tailings and take out the stuff and deal with it appropriately. It may be something as a town and that we may have to do at the waste treatment plant or something, but it's not. We don't do it now. A lot of it isn't serviced, so a lot of these things actually make it worse. And so even though we've got a storm scepter and there's no maintenance plan. So I am happy to see that we talked about swales and talked about maintenance plans, but we should make sure that those are up to the right standards of what they have to be. And and it's going to be, we're talking about water quality, and Rita will probably be on this long after I'm gone from this board. But I think the treatment of stormwater is a huge issue that we haven't really, I can speak for myself. I'm just beginning to understand what the actual impact of it is, and some of the things that I thought were positives are not if they're not maintained. And I think that's, we aren't going to get anywhere adding more drains and more storm scepters and more everything else that aren't maintained. We'd be better off just having dirt parking lots.
As we heard that from Steve Fender.
I know.
And do we ever find out if we are cleaning those things out? I mean,
well, that's
if they're getting. Was it New England? I mean,
the issue,
Winthrop or whoever. Do we ever find out if they're?
Well, the issue why they don't clean them out. I'm not saying they do or they don't.
Yeah.
But a reason why someone might not clean them out is to clean them out properly. Is you have to do it a couple times a year. Twice a year when you first put them in, and then depending how much flow you have, you can do it like once a year.
Mm-hmm.
But what you find is that the expense, if you actually clean it out, separate the stuff, and then send it off to where it has to go away, is $20,000, $50,000.
Yeah, $25,000.
Yeah, $20,000 to $50,000 per neighborhood, per per time. And so that's why people aren't doing it, is it's so expensive. And when we are thinking about taking roads and everything, though all that road stuff's supposed to be dealt with the same way too. So we're taking that obligation. When we start to say, sure, we'll take that road, we'll take those, those drains, yep, we'll do it. We're taking that obligation, and when we finally figure out how to do it properly, it's gonna be expensive. So.
Did you move on to the comment letter for the wellhead?
Yeah, that was on the comments.
Okay.
Okay, so I don't really know if we're adding something as a result of that.
Well, I would say I would like the first one is I'd like something in there about a third of a mile or a 10-minute walk, and these for traffic issues. And this is not in the comment letter. It's not in
comment letter or supplemental. Are we doing supplemental first?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, maybe I'm jumping the gun.
Yeah, that's why I'm trying to make sure we're going A to B.
Okay.
Just because they're a little different.
Okay. Well, I'll get those in right. Okay.
And I just, if those are concerns, they ought to have been in our initial letter. Because
I mentioned the zoning thing in the initial letter. It just didn't make it. I mentioned at the meeting, and it may not make it again, but I can make the comment again.
So okay, it didn't make it because the board didn't vote it.
It didn't make it because it didn't make it.
Okay, I don't
remember.
I don't know what that is.
Well, let's get through the supplemental letter first.
So there's just a couple things that came in after I sent out the letter from the 40B consultant, and they're kind of minor. You'll probably be okay with them. One was you may want some kind of bond posted in connection with work near the sewer easement. So that may be, if you're okay with it, that would be something to add. There was a question about fire issues. Does the fire load take into consideration that condo buildings will have a sprinkler system? The answer is yes from the fire department. And then the trash barrels should be kept in sheds except for pickup day. Details should be provided on proposed trash and recycle system for the condo building, so I can add that in. And the affordability options. Tucker gave me some pretty detailed language on actually, that is probably in the other letter.
I think that's in the comment.
Disregard. That's in the other.
That's a comment letter.
That's in the other letter. Okay. So I don't know. The supplemental was sort of straightforward, I think. Just basically from the consultants.
We took the consultants, cut and pasted that in there.
Yeah, pretty much. All right.
Would you do we need to vote on that? Or are we going to
Yes.
relook at this later?
Well, I need to get it to the ZBA, and I don't.
What's your time frame on that?
Well, their next meeting is, I think, the 27th,
Yep.
and you're not meeting again until the 28th.
Okay.
So if you're okay with it, I'll just fix this up, and no substantive changes, but I get you all to come in and sign it in the next few days.
So I'll make a motion that we, based on the comments we've made, direct the town manager to come up with a final draft and authorize the chairman to sign it on our behalf.
Of the supplemental letter.
Whatever, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They're different.
I understand.
Yeah.
I think the chair could just sign it.
I can sign it.
I think we'll just have the chair sign it.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Wait, comment letter.
Okay, now
Well,
this is.
I'm not sure where
I think
I think some of my comments should be in where, especially in traffic, were appropriate for some of this too. But that's all right.
For the supplemental?
Yeah, but that's all right. Go on.
I think it can still go in the comment letter.
So the next letter is on the modified proposal.
Right.
So there's been something of a reduction in the
Right. Yeah, number 8.
in the proposal. So this got a little tricky because I didn't really know what your position is on the modification. So I just took the original comment letter with the supplemental comments that you just talked about and put them into a comment letter for the modified proposal. So just going through it, at the on page 1, at the beginning, page 1, Erica.
I'm sorry.
So I just want to direct you to that italic bold language. It is important to note that if not referenced here in this November 15th letter, the comments contained in the July 13th letter remain current and ongoing. Okay? So the sewer connection has a little bit of new language. It's listed there. The applicants recently provided additional documents for the town affairs review. We are in the process of obtaining some final review from the town's engineers regarding the sewer situation, which we will provide to the ZBA when we have it. No change to the sewer costs or the sewer easement or the water infrastructure. And then number 5, the wellhead protection district issues. Those are all from our consultant.
Do you want us to comment as we go or at the end?
Yeah, sure. Comment as you go.
So, questions on the sewer. David might be able to answer this. I think I'm a little confused and lost on where we are in the sewers, because we're saying here that a sewer force main is not an option.
Tying in to the existing sewer force main is not an option.
And it also says that a sewer connection is not.
And the installation of a new sewer force main, there was some discussion about, I think, David can correct me, there was some discussion from the applicant installing an additional force main, and my understanding was that was not an option either.
I just want to make sure we're all on the same page in all the departments and we're not going to the state and we're saying different things, because I've heard lots of things about gravity, and I heard recently we do want a sewer force main if they got confusing.
There's different options that they've presented, but the best preferred option still is gravity. We're not there yet on either one. They've also given us an option of running their system to the pump station at Sherburne Commons and then running a brand new force main to the plant. That option is just not, that pump station just can't handle that. So we're not there yet. They have come back and forth a couple of times. We've met with them. We've met with our consultants, and we should have a letter coming soon that give a better clarification on where we are.
So do we need to have that this is not an option if we're still waiting to hear from?
Well, I think they've ruled out these two items. Our engineers, anyway, have ruled out these two items specifically.
Okay.
Good.
Yep, I'm good on that. And I had another question.
And I'll just say that I'm happy with some of the changes on 5. That's one of the points I was making.
Okay.
Is that you were talking regular maintenance of storm drain. Those type of things is important.
I had a question on 5.3 on the swales versus storm scepters. Rita, you might be able to educate me on this. All the big, fire station, schools have all had one thing, and which I think is the storm scepters, right? And we're asking them to do swales, which we did not ask any major development to date. So what's the difference? And this might be more of a process. I know George Pucci isn't here, but can we ask for something that's not normal for every other development? Is that going to be out of bounds and get us in trouble at the? Okay.
That's kind of 2 questions.
Yeah, I would say, and I don't know, that is a George question, but I think swales, Satcham's Path has swales. There's other places that have swales.
Swale here.
Yeah, there's a swale here. So I don't think they're not atypical. I think they're considered an accepted way to deal with stormwater. Some do both. But Matt, you actually had.
Well, that's my point, is that the swales also have a maintenance issue after a certain amount of time. If you don't dig the stuff out every so many years, then all you're doing is accumulating, what goes in there. You're accumulating all the toxins and the oils and everything else in the first part, and then eventually it's going right into the groundwater. So you still have to remove the things that are sucking that up and replant. And so even a swale you can do it. And the difference, the part that I understand is better with the swales, it's cheaper to replace that. And it's not as close to the groundwater. One of the problems with the storm scepters, if they aren't maintained, they aren't designed to take care of certain pollutants anyway. They're very good if they're maintained at separating oil and a couple other pollutants, but they have to be maintained. If they're not maintained, you've really created a problem, because you ended up with a single source of pollutant pushed deeper into the ground, closer to the water table. So you've just taken everything from the parking lot or from the property, run it into this thing and you've put it even closer. So that's why I said you're better off with a dirt parking lot. At least it's spreading over a larger area, and it'll bind it up for a longer period.
Don?
It kind of seems to me that whichever treatment is used, the real issue for us is proper maintenance.
And oversight.
And that's like making sure that to me, the conditions are that there's a very strong HOA to maintain all of this.
Yeah, I think maintenance, you're correct. Either way, maintenance is essential, and it's something that, particularly with swales, but even storm scepters, because storm scepters, out of sight, out of mind. Swales, people think you plant them and you leave them and you never have to touch them again. To Matt's point, though, I think in areas that are sensitive, the whole idea is that plants and soil are supposed to be the first point of contact for pollutants, and they keep them out at that surface level. Whereas the storm scepters they take all that pollutants, they move really quickly down lower, closer to what you're trying to protect. So you just lose that first layer of filtration. So, I think that particularly in these kind of settings, they can be, when they're done well, they can really add to the landscape. And I do think that they are. They're sort of a better first defense in a sensitive area than a storm scepter, especially if they're not going to be maintained. If a swale is not maintained, you will know it. If a storm scepter is not maintained, you don't know it. Yeah.
All right. So some of the background why I'm asking some of these questions is I want to make sure if we're going to ask for swales, which I assume takes more ground cover.
Yeah, it would take. You still couldn't. You can't build over it. You can't. You
Right.
still have to keep it.
I just want to make sure if we're going to ask for a lot of different things, that could either take more ground cover, or ask more cost, then the density goes back up from 100.
I think the
know-
swales would be achievable. I don't think, and I would have to look at those numbers exactly, but I don't think
Right.
it's going to have a significant impact on how much space would be needed.
I'm looking at this modified comment letter as the 100 units, which I like that it went down 56 units. So I want to make sure we're asking for certain things. Like, we can do that. Now it's 140 units. I know there's a balance there between environment and it's a combination of swales, and this is just a small version example.
We do want to be able to back things up in terms of the fact that if every municipal building that we're building ourselves is using storm scepters, how do we ask anyone else to use a different treatment?
Well, I think
and
it's
make it a
something we should.
requirement.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's something we should do going forward, but I think that the state would look at that. And I want our letter to be strong on the points that can be backed up.
I think also this is a wellhead protection zone, so I think being a bit more. Oh, sorry, gosh, this is a wellhead protection.
No,
sorry,
but so is this, and so is the school, and so is where all the gas stations are.
Swales, yeah, and I think to that point, I guess I'm okay requesting because again, we need to start making these changes. Stormwater is something that I think we, to Matt's point, have totally ignored inappropriately. So I think that starting to say, particularly still, obviously a reduction in density is better, but it's still roughly 3 times the density that would be there otherwise. So I think that being strict on things that protect our water quality is still, I'm fine with being as strict as possible.
Okay, that makes sense. Does the board feel that we have enough maintenance language in there that's strong enough? It sounded like we all had in a consensus that maintenance is the key here.
Yeah.
Whether it's storm scepters or swales.
I don't know how to make it any more strict.
Right.
But.
Well, in an ideal world, you'd have somewhere where there'd be a maintenance contract would be filed somewhere, health department or somewhere, and they would have to regularly give the receipts and the updates that it's been done. So in an ideal world, eventually you'd get to that point where these things are tracked, and you'd know, and you'd find the people that didn't do it. So maybe the wording is, maybe the wording says something like, following the requirements of the town on these issues. I don't know, the words aren't coming to me, but you see what I'm saying, Libby? Sort of.
Yeah.
It's close.
It's close. It's got a Y at the end.
Rita and Libby.
Oh, yeah.
That's all I had on the wellhead.
Okay, I can add something about filing, tracking, something like that.
Or even just what the following the rules of the town at any one time. When the town gets to the point that we do that, it shouldn't be like, oh, the old people don't, and the new people do. Everyone should do it.
Yeah, well, like with all the IA systems now, they're required.
Exactly.
So
to
maybe
file
something like
paperwork
compliance
yearly.
with any present or future town regulations pertaining to stormwater. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Public safety, there were no issues other than fire. There were a couple of additional comments there noted there. Public health, there was a bit of a modification of a comment from July 13th, which is reflected there. This sort of gets at the maintenance issue as well. Regular maintenance must be logged semi-annually. Traffic is the same as the other letter.
All right, what is who came up with the percent volume increase, conceptual estimates for roundabout sharing money?
That, I believe, came from the consultant, and
Okay.
Mike could speak to that.
This is, sorry, Mike.
No, it was based off traffic counts and the traffic generation. It assumed that all the traffic generated from the property would be 100% auto dependent, so it was meant to be conservative. But that was their proportion of traffic under a build out condition projected into the future build year. That was what all the array of traffic consultants that have looked at this. That's the consensus that we all came to. Was that this percentage, again, based on a 100 unit and then based on a 156 unit, what the percentages broke down to be. Again, we are using a very conceptual estimate of what it would cost to actually improve the intersection, extremely conceptual. So that's where we're applying this percentage to that dollar figure, and then that's where we're getting the bottom line number from. Again, it's some guesstimating going on, but at least they're the ratios and proportions of mitigation was something that all the consultants could agree upon.
Would there be a way, because one of my concerns is you were talking 5.5, but then we're also modeling a percent just of normal growth, and that's before anything else like this pops in. So when I see numbers like that, I compute them and say in 15 years, 15 to 20, we've doubled the number of vehicles in that area. Like the rule of 7% doubles in 10 years. Mm-hmm. So you see, so I'm looking at this saying, so and anyway, I like how do we put that into context? We're not going to have twice as many roads here in 15 to 20 years. We're not, we may have twice as many cars, but we're not going to have twice as many roads. How do we put that into context that, can we say things like, we're working on, on traffic mitigation. We're working on getting people out of their cars. We realize our island has limited road space, limited space to add roads. Is there anything in the that would strengthen our position? We're taking a very strong position of trying to curb that growth because we can't, as an island, sustain it. How do we get that in the letter? Is my sort of.
Well, as far as the use of an automobile and the residents who may live in the development,
that development or
anywhere really. Yeah. That's why we're so strong on making the sidewalk infrastructure and connectivity so part of this program. Running a sidewalk along both sides of South Shore Road from this development to the intersection where there's an extremely busy bus stop. That's something that I believe has been offered for this revision.
I think that's different than the point. And I agree with all those points, and those are easy. Mm-hmm. My point is how do we say that sort of this is a density and this is a number of vehicles that we're in the countryside that we're trying to avoid. That we as a town have recognized we can't handle. And we're trying to put our density into the town areas and not into the country areas. We're trying not to put them, we're trying to put them within a third of a mile in a 10-minute walk, not car dependent like you have cited, which is true.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying we're going to make them car dependent. I'm saying we
They are.
assumed
We
that
assume
they're
they are
going to
because
be,
they are, because they are.
and say that's the contribution to traffic. Now, this community does have one of the best mode splits in the country. This is a very good example for other communities to look at. We assumed those numbers to get the percentages we have. They do have a little bit of a high percentage, but I think taking the program and the site location and then making recommendations for the array of mitigations, I think we tried to do the best we could to suggest mitigation for this. There's a very busy bus stop that's some distance away from this development. That's actually, those stops are more used than they are now. Same with the bike paths and the and whatnot that people can bike to where they're going, not necessarily walk, but bike to where the shopping and everything is. I hope that kind of answers the question. But again, in order to get the numbers correct, I mean, you really should understand that the traffic generated by this project is assumed to be 100%. They are using the automobile. They're not walking, biking, or using the bus. And we do have an extremely good ratio of people that do walk, bike, and use the bus here on this island. So I would take that into consideration.
I'm looking for an answer.
I mean, do we need stronger language about limiting like parking medallions in the development? That's something that we discussed at 6FG.
The on-street, the layout of the road itself, we asked that the revised plan include on-street parking in order to capture some of this spillover so that, worst case scenario, the cars wouldn't be parked all up and down South Shore Road. That's what you don't want to have happen. There are some, according to the bylaws, parking accommodations on the sites itself. We actually wanted more spillover parking for guests and whoever else on street, and they've done that in the revised proposal. The 156 unit proposal still doesn't show that, so that's also something you should know.
Yeah, but in terms of like overnight parking, like I think that their proposal over here was like the ones, twos, and studios got one parking pass. And then the threes got two, and if anyone wanted an additional one, they had to go and make a strong argument to the management company, or they had to consider parking in the municipal lot instead, and that there wouldn't be parking all up and down that street overnight.
We could be asking for a parking plan. This again goes to the issue that we're having in a lot of these areas. It's the design, and it's having spaces for the cars. It's not, it's sort of which comes first. And if we don't say, set some sort of plan for it, and then you're going to end up with them parked wherever they feel like. Yeah. The other issue on parking, sort of big picture issue, is the way it's set up now. You go the furthest into the second rendition, the further you go in the property, then you hit the apartment buildings, which I actually hate, and then they're surrounded by a parking area. So the neighbors don't get green space. They look at parking. They look at cars. So and the parking itself isn't contained within the sort of tucked away inconspicuously. Right. It becomes a central part of that entire development. The last plan we saw, and and that is, I think, that's not being a good neighbor at all, in my opinion.
We heard that from the neighbors that they're gonna. This guy said, "All I'm going to see is headlights." So I lived there 40 years or something.
Yeah, you have to be a good neighbor. I purposely didn't put, three curb cuts when I put a couple of cottages in for employees. I made one lot away from everybody that I actually let them use if they want, the neighbors too, and it works for the whole development. That's what should be happening here. That should be taken into context. The neighbors shouldn't be facing a parking lot ringing three sides of some big apartment buildings. They're in, anyway. And I don't know how we write that in, but. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, if
Jamie's
I could
going to fix it. Sure. Are you going to fix it for me? That would be great.
Jamie Feely for the record. I wasn't planning on trying to address any of these issues on a kind of one by one item, but I am compelled to just talk to that one. So on the perimeter around the backside of the condos, we have a 25-foot buffer, and we're proposing a 6-foot fence for the lights for the neighbors, and then there's their setback on the other side. So you have a good amount of vegetation there, and then you have a fence to deal with it. So the idea of putting the parking on the outside was to create like a walking, common community in between that whole green area.
Thank you.
Did you want to add anything on that? What, you and Mike go back and forth? You said you were looking for an answer. Mike, you were getting ready to say something at the end.
It's, you know.
I mean, I hate to throw in another bullet item you might want to put in as an ask, but what you could do is, you know, once the project is built out, have some funding set aside to do a parking management program for this development if it's deemed to be necessary. And that could easily be done through escrowing funds for the cost of that, and perhaps some program that really does not exist yet, but funds to implement some kind of management program, whether it's a sticker, a permit, something like this. I have no idea. But escrow some funds for a parking management strategy. If you, once it's built out, it's deemed to be a problem within a certain window of time after the project's developed. That's something that's done in other communities. I can't recall of an example here locally, but that is an option.
Part of, I think, the problem that we have here, even at 100 units, if you go through Beach Plum, there's no parking problem. You know, they have on-street parking. They've got plenty of for visitors. They've got plenty of space for cars to park, and it's a really, you know, nice little community now. It really is. I think sort of the problem here is we're trying to fit a bit too much into that one space, and then so all of a sudden you have 100 units and 200 need so many cars. You know, I just think it's, you know, we're sort of fighting ourselves. If we were looking at that, I don't even think we'd be talking about it. But that's me.
So this is off topic, but Don mentioned my comment and people parking. So are we going to have should we be thinking about taking some preemptive action on South Shore Road in terms of restricting parking and things like that? I assume you can park there now. Do people park on South Shore Road?
I don't think so.
You can't park there now? Okay.
I haven't seen a problem with it.
I've parked there. I mean, I'm going to. Pardon?
Most of the lots are big enough to accommodate.
Oh, but you're allowed to park on South Shore Road. I've parked there. So.
Yeah, I guess there's nothing saying. You do see people pulling up on the little strip in between the bike path and the road on occasion, but it seems more that's probably event based, would be my guess.
You know, as we're observing some downstream results of not adequate planning. Somebody should be thinking about that at some point.
Art Gasparo has an article he's bringing to town meeting this year to prohibit people from parking, you know, on the green space in between bike paths and roads, because we went and fixed a whole bunch and made it beautiful, and it was all ruined within a week because the trucks and everybody else using it as a parking area, and it's just not what's supposed to happen. And so I think it's, you know, I think people are seeing it all around the island.
Well, do you want to have something like what Mike suggested? Something like once the project is built out, a parking management program must be established if deemed necessary by the town through an escrow to be established for this purpose. I don't know, something like that.
That's fine.
Or,
something like that. Just so it's on the, if there's an issue, it's on the record.
Okay, so we can put that under B for under parking issues.
B for Burns.
That too. Environmental sensitivity, so there weren't any other comments until this one. Environmental sensitivity, item 10. There's quite a lot of comment here. This came from our consultant. Numerous conditions and some background about the environmental issues.
I thought it looked good. No, I thought it looked good.
Fine, yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Item 11, overcrowding of the property in the neighborhood. I really did not know what to do here. This wasn't really a consultant issue. So I just included the wording from your July 13th letter, but I don't really know if you want to make any changes to it.
Is the 12 units per acre, is that the updated number based on the modified proposal?
No, that is right from the July 13th letter. So actually, I guess that would have to be.
So that has to be
Yeah,
adjusted.
So we have to edit it or just not
Yeah.
use it.
No, you gotta-
It's
you
been
gotta change the
changed quite a bit.
percentages.
So instead of saying no changes from July 11th, we'll have to edit that accordingly.
Okay, so I'll get the correct numbers put in here, and then do you leave it, or?
I would leave it with the adjusted numbers. I do think it's
Okay.
still overwhelming the neighborhood.
And I think this might be where my comments about a third of a mile, a 10-minute walk to a store, that this area is not within sort of, common urban principles. It's going to be a very car-dependent
Mhm.
location because of the location and that density. It rely on people for the most part. So.
What would you want it to say exactly, Matt? I mean, not verbatim, but what are we asking the ZBA to consider?
We're saying that this is, let me think about it, come back to it.
Okay, all right.
Use something before urban, new urbanization.
Well, no, basically the principles of are that you want density within a 10-minute walk of services and things. That makes it less car dependent. This area is clearly not. This is in the suburbs. This is in the country. This isn't, this isn't the fire station that we should make as dense as possible. This is, from planning principles would dictate that there be less density. Here might be planning principles would dictate that there be less density in this area, not because it's not adjacent to services,
Amenities,
to
yeah.
shopping and services, and this is not. And it's interesting, Fairgrounds here is about 500 feet from town, and it's even closer to Amelia, which now, so it's sort of, which now has services. So that's, that is within that sort of range. It's at the edge of it, but that's within that range. This is clearly not.
Mhm.
So I'm trying to think of how to convey that, that's all. And I'll think about it. Go to the next thing.
Okay.
When does this due? I mean, when
This
do we
is
need
our
to-
only crack out, right?
Yeah.
Or to get it to the next ZBA meeting, because we don't have another meeting.
It seems like we're, doing this in a large forum, and I wonder if there's a more efficient way to do it.
Yeah.
But maybe not.
We're almost.
I mean,
Okay.
I do agree that it's ideal to be walking distance, but we do have to give some recognition to the bus service that's provided now year round, because it is an alternative.
Right.
Okay, no changes for energy and school. Affordability options, number 14. This wording came from Tucker, and I've shown you the stricken wording. That was from the July 13th letter, and I think the new language here is I don't know. Do you want to summarize, Tucker?
Dawn?
Could we ever include a requirement about providing bus passes within the development?
You could ask for that to be.
I don't know,
condition.
just maybe something to encourage use of public transportation.
I like that idea.
Sure. With the affordability, the original letter had talked about the idea of exploring other AMI levels being included in what the developer is putting together beyond the basic requirement of 40B, 25% at 80% AMI. And I believe that the developers have been doing, quite a bit of look. I think they took their request seriously and have looked closely at how they might be able to restrict units to serve the year-round community, particularly the condominium product. And my understanding is the intention is for 100% of the condominium units to be restricted to year-round residency. And then, of course, 25% of the cottage product. So this language in here basically is saying, in short, there are a number of details that the ZBA needs to look at in conjunction with the developer to ensure those intentions are actually realized, and that's what we're bringing to their attention.
Thank you.